Hello everyone, I am the Creep's Cabin. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from? And what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. It was Christmas Eve, and I was about 12 or 13 years old. My parents had gone out to a Christmas party and wouldn't be back until late. This wasn't unusual. I was old enough to stay home alone for a few hours, and I had done it plenty of times before. I liked the time alone, doing my usual thing, watching TV, playing Xbox, eating whatever snacks I could find in the kitchen. The house was warm, the Christmas tree lights were glowing, and everything felt normal. I wasn't tired yet, so I stayed up later than I should have, sitting in the living room with the TV on low volume, half watching a movie, half messing around on my phone. I could hear the occasional sound of the wind outside, the distant hum of cars passing on the main road a few streets over, but nothing out of the ordinary. After a while, I turned everything off, locked the doors, and went upstairs to my bedroom. As soon as I climbed into bed, my heart started beating faster than usual. It wasn't like I was thinking about anything scary or feeling anxious, but it was noticeable, like a sudden rush of adrenaline for no reason. I laid there, staring at the ceiling, waiting for it to pass. It didn't. My breathing felt normal, but my chest was tight, and I couldn't understand why. I tried rolling over, pulling the blankets tighter, closing my eyes. Still, the feeling didn't go away. Then I heard it, a banging noise at the front door. It wasn't like a gentle knock, or the sound of the wind rattling something outside. It was a solid, deliberate banging. 3 or 4 times, then silence. My stomach dropped. My first thought was that my parents had come home early, maybe forgot their keys. But I knew that wasn't right. They would have called me or texted if that were the case. I got up slowly, every step feeling heavier than the last. The house was dead silent now. I walked down the hallway and peeked down the stairs. Nothing. The front door was in view, but there was no shadow through the frosted glass, no sign of anyone standing there. I hesitated, then slowly walked down. My hand hovered over the doorknob, and I listened. Nothing. I flicked on the porch light and looked through the peephole. Nobody. I unlocked the door just enough to crack it open and looked outside. The porch was empty. The street was quiet, only a few Christmas lights twinkling from other houses. No footprints in the light dusting of snow on the driveway. I closed the door, locked it, and went back upstairs, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling. I climbed back into bed, convincing myself it was just my imagination. Maybe the wind had knocked something over. Then it happened again. This time, it wasn't just the banging. There was a voice. It was low, muffled, almost like a whisper. I couldn't make out what was being said, but it was definitely a man's voice. The hair on my arms stood up. My heartbeat, which had already been racing, felt like it was pounding in my ears. And then a growl. A deep, low, rumbling growl coming from somewhere near the front door. My stomach clenched. We didn't have a dog. I knew that sound shouldn't be there. It wasn't on TV. It wasn't a neighbor's dog. It was close, too close. I yanked the covers up over my head, squeezing my eyes shut, trying to block it out. But it was still there, just under the sound of my breathing. Then came the crash, the unmistakable sound of glass shattering. I stopped breathing. I couldn't move. My mind was racing, trying to process what had just happened. A window. Someone had broken a window. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate thudding from the living room. The voice was still there, murmuring something I couldn't understand. The growling continued. And then, the sound of things being moved, furniture shifting, something being dragged, a rustling noise. I laid completely still, every muscle in my body tense, my hands gripping the blanket so tightly my fingers ached. I waited for something to happen, for the sound of footsteps on the stairs, for the creak of my bedroom door opening, for anything. But after a while, everything stopped. Silence. I don't know how long I stayed like that, frozen in place, my breath shallow and my body stiff. At some point, exhaustion must have taken over, because the next thing I remember was waking up to daylight filtering through my bedroom window. For a split second, I thought maybe I had imagined it all, that it had been a dream. But as soon as I sat up, I felt that same tight feeling in my chest. I got up slowly, my legs shaky as I walked to my bedroom door. The house was eerily quiet, like it was holding its breath. I stepped out into the hallway, pausing to listen. Nothing. I made my way downstairs, every step hesitant. The living room was exactly as I had left it. The couch was in place. The TV was off. The Christmas tree lights were still on, casting soft colors across the walls. The window was intact. No shattered glass, no sign of a break-in. I checked the front door. It was still locked. I walked through the entire house, searching for any evidence of what I had heard the night before. But there was nothing. No footprints in the snow outside. No signs of forced entry. No mess. Everything was exactly as it should have been. I sat on the couch, trying to make sense of it. I knew I hadn't imagined it. The sounds, the voice, the growling, it had been real. But there was no proof, nothing to explain what had happened. Later that day, my parents came home, cheerful and hungover from their Christmas party. I didn't say anything about it. It felt too strange to bring up, and I wasn't sure what I would even say. I think I heard someone in the house, but there's no sign of it. They would have brushed it off, told me I was just paranoid from being alone. But I know what I heard. I know what I felt. And even though nothing seemed to have happened, I never felt completely safe in that house again. Every Christmas Eve after that, I couldn't help but remember that night. The banging, the voice, the dog that wasn't there, and the feeling deep in my gut that someone or something had been inside the house with me, even if I never found proof. I was about 13 when my parents went on a trip, leaving my grandmother to watch over me and my sister. It wasn't anything unusual. She had babysat us before, and we always felt safe with her. I don't remember exactly when I started feeling sick, but by the evening, I was so drained that I curled up on the couch in the living room and fell asleep. The house was quiet except for the occasional muffled sounds of my grandmother watching TV in the other room. The air felt heavy, and my skin was clammy with fever. I woke up in the middle of the night. At first, I wasn't sure why. My body ached, my head was pounding, and I felt weak. The house was dark except for the glow of the streetlights filtering through the curtains. The quiet was unsettling. I shifted, trying to get comfortable, and that's when I saw it. A small figure stood just outside my sister's bedroom, partially hidden by the doorway. My first thought was that it was my sister. She was younger than me and sometimes had trouble sleeping. Maybe she had come out to get some water or check if I was awake. I squinted at her shadowy form. Something was off. "Are you okay?" My voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. She didn't answer. She didn't move. The dim light from the window barely reached her, but something caught my eye. A reflection, a glint in her eye. Not like the soft shine of light catching a person's gaze, but something unnatural, like glass or metal. The instant I saw it, something deep in my gut screamed that this wasn't my sister. My breath caught in my throat. My muscles locked. I wanted to scream for my grandmother, but I couldn't move, couldn't speak. My body was frozen, my heartbeat thudding against my ribs so hard I could feel it in my ears. The figure didn't step closer. It didn't retreat. It just lingered there, staring. Then, without a sound, it turned and disappeared into my sister's room. Fear twisted in my stomach. My sister was in there. I needed to check on her. Needed to do something. But I couldn't bring myself to get up. I lay there for what felt like hours, my body stiff with terror. Eventually, exhaustion and fever dragged me back into unconsciousness. The next morning, sunlight poured through the windows, warm and normal, as if nothing had happened. My sister was fine. I didn't tell her. I didn't tell my grandmother. The fear still clung to me, but I convinced myself I had imagined it. Maybe it was the fever. Maybe it was a dream. I wanted to believe that. 3 years later, I had moved into my sister's old room. She had gotten a bigger room, and I didn't mind taking her smaller one. It had been a while since I thought about that night, and even if the memory still lingered, it felt distant. The room was mine now, my own space. It was supposed to feel safe. One night, I woke up suddenly. Not to a sound, not to a dream, just a feeling. The kind that reaches into the core of your being and demands attention. My skin prickled with unease, my chest heavy, my breath shallow. The room was dark, but something felt wrong. I turned my head. My stomach twisted into a knot so tight I thought I would be sick. There was something there. Not standing in the doorway. Not at the foot of my bed. It was close. Too close. A face hovered just inches from mine. Its hair was tangled and black, strands sticking out in odd directions. Its skin was pale, almost sickly, stretched thin over sharp bones. And its eyes, deep black voids, held something indescribable. Not just malice, not just anger. It was worse than that. It was as if fear itself had taken shape and was staring straight into me. Every muscle in my body locked up. My breathing stopped. I wanted to recoil, wanted to run, but I couldn't move. It felt like I was being crushed under the weight of my own terror. My body refused to respond. It was the same paralyzing fear I had felt 3 years ago, only worse. Because this time, it wasn't standing in a doorway. It was right there, inches away, watching me with eyes that swallowed all light. I don't know how long it lasted. Seconds. Minutes. Time felt meaningless. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it was gone. No fading away. No slow retreat. Just gone. The moment I could move again, I shot out of bed. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would burst. My skin was slick with sweat. My hands shook. I couldn't stay in that room. Not alone. I grabbed my blanket and rushed to my sister's room, barely able to breathe. From that night on, I never slept in that room alone again. My sister and I shared her room for the rest of my time in that house. I never told her why. Never told anyone. There was nothing to explain, no logic that would make sense of it. But I knew I wasn't safe there. That room became storage not long after I moved out. Even now, I don't like thinking about it. Some things don't need explanations. Some things don't go away just because you pretend they aren't there. I don't remember living in that apartment, but my mother does. She swears to this day that something wasn't right about it. I was a baby, barely old enough to crawl, but according to her, strange things happened whenever she left me alone in the bedroom, things she could never explain. She used to leave me in the crib while she went to do laundry. It was a small apartment, just a bedroom, a living room, a tiny kitchen, and a bathroom. The laundry room was down the hall, not too far, but far enough that she didn't want to leave me alone for long. At that age, I was always moving, crawling, trying to climb, making noise. She said she'd check on me before she left, and I'd be awake, kicking my legs, playing with my blanket, babbling to myself. But when she came back, everything would be different. I would be tucked in neatly, lying still, my blanket smooth, my stuffed animals perfectly arranged. The first time it happened, she didn't think much of it. Maybe I had rolled around just right. Maybe she had tucked me in and forgotten. But it kept happening. Every time she left, she would come back to find me asleep, my crib organized in a way that a baby couldn't have managed. She started paying closer attention, making sure she wasn't imagining it. She wasn't. My dad was never home during the day. He worked long shifts, leaving early in the morning and coming back late at night. My mom and I were alone in that apartment most of the time. After a few days of this happening, she got scared. She told my dad about it, but he brushed it off, told her she was just tired, that she was overthinking it. He didn't believe in anything he couldn't see with his own eyes. But my mom couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. She bought a baby monitor, one of those old ones with a little speaker she could carry around. She wanted to hear what was happening when she wasn't in the room. She set it up on the nightstand next to my crib, turned it on, and went about her day. She could hear me moving, making noises, playing as usual. Then she heard something else. At first, it was just static, little pops and hisses. Then it changed. She said the sound started to shift, rising and falling, like high-pitched whistles mixed with low rumbles. It was strange, unnatural. It didn't sound like feedback or interference. It sounded deliberate. She felt a chill run through her, but she forced herself to go check on me. When she got to the bedroom, she found me on all fours in the crib, completely still, staring at the corner of the room. She called my name, but I didn't move. I just kept looking at the same spot, not blinking, not making a sound. My mom felt her chest tighten, a creeping dread settling in her stomach. She walked over slowly, following my gaze to the nightstand beside my crib. That's when she saw it. Something had been carved into the wood, deep scratches forming words. For words, jagged and uneven like they had been scratched in with something sharp. I hate messy cribs. My mom felt her breath catch in her throat. Her hands started to shake. She ran her fingers over the letters, feeling the rough grooves. They weren't old marks. They were fresh. She looked back at me, still frozen in place, still staring at the same spot. She grabbed me, holding me tight against her chest, and ran out of the room. That night, she refused to stay in the apartment. She told my dad everything, showed him the nightstand, but he still didn't believe her. He told her it was probably an old scratch she never noticed before, that it was nothing. But my mom wouldn't listen. She packed our bags and took me to my grandparents' house, refusing to go back. A few days later, my dad finally agreed to move out. Not because he believed her, but because he saw how terrified she was. He didn't want to fight about it. He didn't want to listen to her talk about something he thought was impossible. He just wanted things to go back to normal. They found a new place, a different apartment in a different neighborhood. My mom never went back to the old one, not even to pick up the last of our things. My dad had to do it alone. He said nothing strange happened while he was there. But he did admit one thing. The words on the nightstand, when he went back, they were gone. Not scratched out, not covered up, just gone, like they had never been there at all. Two years ago, I had to drive a car from Louisiana to North Carolina. It was a long trip, nearly 11 hours, so I decided to stop for the night somewhere near the halfway point. Auburn, Alabama, seemed like a good place to rest. I pulled off the highway, found a sleep-in, and booked a room. It was just a basic hotel, the kind you see everywhere. 3 floors, beige walls, standard decor, nothing fancy. I got a room on the 3rd floor. It was a normal setup, bed, desk, TV, a small sofa, and a bathroom. I threw my bag on the floor, pulled out my laptop, and flopped onto the sofa. I messaged a friend for a bit, talking about some horror movies, then started watching an episode of Castle to wind down. About 20 minutes in, I heard a faint clinking noise. It was soft, like metal tapping on porcelain. I paused my show and listened. It was coming from the bathroom. My first thought was that it had to be coming from the next room. Thin walls, maybe a neighbor dropping something in their sink. I shrugged it off and hit play. A few minutes later, I noticed the TV screen flicker. Suddenly, the show cut out, and the TV switched to a different channel. I stared at it for a second, confused. The screen was showing the end credits of a movie I hadn't been watching. I looked around, trying to figure out what happened. Maybe I sat on the remote. I checked. The remote was on top of the TV, untouched. A strange feeling settled in my gut. I got up, walked to the TV, and turned it off. The room felt different now, like the air had thickened slightly. I sat back on the sofa, picked up my laptop again, and forced myself to focus on my show. I told myself it was some kind of electrical glitch. That made sense, right? The clinking sound started again. This time, it wasn't faint. It was louder, rhythmic. Asterisk clink, 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 asterisk. I sat up straight. It wasn't coming from the next room. It was coming from my bathroom. My stomach tightened. I glanced at the bathroom door. It was slightly open, just a crack. I stared at the dark gap, feeling an irrational sense of dread. I didn't want to go in there, but I had to. I forced myself to stand, walked slowly to the bathroom, and pushed the door open. The sink was dry. The toilet looked normal. But the bathtub faucet was on, a steady stream of water flowing down the drain. I turned the handle. The water stopped. My hands were cold. I rubbed them together, trying to shake off the weird feeling creeping up my spine. Maybe I bumped the faucet earlier without realizing it. I backed out of the bathroom and sat on the bed, staring at the bathroom door. I didn't feel right. I wasn't the kind of person who scared easily, but something about this situation was making my skin crawl. I needed to clear my head. I grabbed the hotel phone and dialed the front desk. The line clicked, then nothing but static. I pressed the phone harder against my ear, listening. Beneath the static, I could hear a voice, but it was warped and distant. I spoke into the receiver. "Hello, can you hear me?" A few garbled words came through. Something about not being able to hear me. I hung up the phone. That was it. I wasn't staying in that room. I grabbed my key card, threw my laptop into my bag, and headed straight for the elevator. When I reached the lobby, I told the receptionist what had happened. She just blinked at me for a few seconds before laughing nervously. "I'm sorry," she said, still grinning. "We've never had anything like that happen before." I stared at her, waiting for her to take me seriously. She didn't. She just kept smiling, like I was some paranoid idiot. She offered me a new room, right next to my old one. I refused. She offered me one on the 4th floor. I hesitated, but I didn't want to seem like I was overreacting. I took it. On the way up, a teenager in the elevator gave me a weird look, like he somehow knew I was spooked. I ignored him. My new room was identical to the last one. Same layout, same furniture. I dropped my bag on the floor and sat on the bed, trying to shake off the unease. Everything seemed fine. No weird noises. No flickering lights. The only sound was a faint clicking noise from the mini fridge, but that was normal. I told myself it had all been in my head. Maybe I was just overtired from driving all day. Maybe the faucet had been loose, and the TV really had been a glitch. That's what I made myself believe. The next morning, I left as soon as I woke up. I barely glanced at the third floor as I stepped into the elevator. I didn't want to think about that room. I drove the rest of the way to North Carolina and put the whole experience behind me. Months later, I found the hotel receipt while cleaning out my car. I glanced at the address printed on it. Something about it seemed strange. The hotel was on Spirit Drive. I sat there for a long time, staring at those words. My brain kept trying to rationalize everything that had happened, but I couldn't shake the memory of that dripping faucet and the static-filled phone call. I threw the receipt away and never thought about that hotel again. It was a cold afternoon when we decided to go to the cemetery for my photography class project. The assignment was to capture emotions through photography, and I thought a graveyard would make for a perfect backdrop. The way the weather had been gloomy all day added to the somber atmosphere. I had asked a couple of my friends to come along to model for me. They thought it was a bit of a weird place to take pictures, but they agreed anyway. We packed my camera gear and some extra props, then headed to the cemetery, which was only a short drive away. When we arrived, there was barely anyone there. A few people here and there, visiting graves, leaving flowers, standing quietly by headstones. It was peaceful, but there was something about the silence that made it feel heavier than usual. We walked further into the graveyard, looking for a good spot. Some of the headstones were old, the names carved into them nearly faded away by time. Others looked newer, well kept, with fresh flowers and photographs placed beside them. I set up my camera, adjusting the settings while my friends got into place. One of them, Emily, was the first to pose. I asked her to look sad, to make it seem like she was mourning someone. She nodded, turning towards a large family grave. It was a tall, polished stone monument with multiple names engraved on it. I focused on my camera, adjusting the light, getting the angle just right. When I finally looked up to take the shot, I noticed something odd. Emily wasn't just pretending to be sad. She was really crying. Her shoulders shook, and I could see real tears rolling down her face. I hesitated before snapping a couple of pictures, thinking she was just getting really into the role. But then I realized she wasn't just looking at the grave. She was staring at the names on it. It was her family's name. Not just the last name, but every single first name, too. Her dad's name, her mom's name, her sister's and her brother's. Exact spellings, exact order. Her entire immediate family, carved into stone as if they had died years ago. Her family was alive, living in another state. A cold chill ran through me as I stepped closer to look at the names myself, my breath catching in my throat. The air felt heavier all of a sudden, pressing down on me, making it hard to breathe. Emily wiped her face with the back of her hand, still staring at the names, whispering something under her breath that I couldn't hear. I didn't know what to say. None of us did. We stood there in silence for what felt like forever before I finally mumbled something about moving to another spot. Emily didn't argue. She turned away quickly, rubbing her arms like she was trying to shake off a bad feeling. The rest of the photo shoot felt uneasy. No one talked much, and every little sound made us flinch. A twig snapping under our feet, the distant sound of a crow cawing, even the wind rustling through the trees, it all felt unnatural. After about 30 minutes, we decided to call it a day. The sun was starting to set, and the last thing we wanted was to be there after dark. We walked back to my car in silence, the gravel crunching under our shoes the only sound between us. I could tell Emily was still shaken. Her hands were clenched into fists at her sides, her lips pressed into a thin line. When we got into the car, I turned on the engine and plugged in a USB with some music to break the silence. It was a playlist one of my friends had brought, just some random songs we all liked. We drove in silence for a bit, letting the music fill the awkward tension. Then it happened. We had been listening to the same song on repeat for the third time when, out of nowhere, the music cut off completely. For a second, there was nothing but static. Then a voice, low, rough, and distorted, came through the speakers. "Get back from where you came from." It was clear, loud. The words echoed through the car like they came from inside our heads rather than the speakers. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the song continued right where it had left off. No one spoke. No one moved. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I turned the music off completely, my breath coming in short, shallow gasps. I felt like I couldn't think straight. My friends sat frozen, their eyes wide, their faces pale. We pulled over. No one wanted to say it first, but we were all thinking the same thing. What the hell just happened? I tried to come up with a rational explanation. Maybe it was interference from another radio signal. Maybe it was some weird glitch in the USB. But the way the voice had sounded, it didn't feel like an accident. It felt deliberate. We sat there for a long time, staring at the dashboard, trying to convince ourselves it was nothing. But I knew we all felt it. That deep, gut-wrenching unease that told us something was wrong. After a few minutes, I started the car again. No one spoke the whole way home. When I dropped my friends off, they got out quickly, barely saying goodbye. Emily left without looking back. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the grave, about Emily's reaction, about that voice. I wanted to forget it, to move on, to convince myself it was just a coincidence. But it didn't feel like one. A few days later, I went through the pictures I had taken. Everything looked normal, except for the ones of Emily in front of that grave. In every shot, her face looked different than I remembered, more distorted. Her expression was twisted in a way that didn't make sense, like she was caught between crying and screaming. I checked the metadata. No editing, no glitches. It was just how the pictures came out. I never showed them to her. We never talked about that day again, and I never went back to that cemetery. It was a quiet afternoon, the kind of still, almost eerie silence that only comes in the countryside. The sky was pale, overcast, the kind of gray that made everything around it look muted and dull. I was 11 years old, walking along a narrow country road with my best friend. The road stretched on for miles in either direction, cutting through rolling fields, disappearing into the distance with no sign of life beyond the trees and hedges that lined either side. Where we lived, towns were small and far apart, and most people lived outside of them, scattered across the countryside. These roads were mostly empty. You could walk for an hour and not see a single car. That was part of what made it feel safe, the quiet, the emptiness. We were used to being alone out here. We had been walking for a while, talking about pointless things, the way kids do. The only sounds were our footsteps crunching against the gravel and the occasional gust of wind rustling through the trees. We weren't really thinking about anything, weren't worried about anything. There was no reason to be. It was just another day. Then we heard the hum of a car engine behind us. That alone wasn't strange, but something about it made me feel uneasy. It was moving slowly, too slowly. We both turned our heads at the same time, just as a white car pulled up beside us. It stopped, rolling to a halt on the narrow road. The engine idled. Inside the car, there were two people, a man in the driver's seat and a woman sitting in the back. The man was large, broad-shouldered, with a thick neck and short-cropped hair. He looked Eastern European, Polish maybe, though at the time, I couldn't place it. His expression was unreadable, but there was something about the way he looked at us that made my stomach twist. He wasn't just looking, he was assessing, like we weren't people, just objects. The woman in the back seat was different. She was staring at us, but her face was completely blank. No emotion, no recognition, nothing. Her eyes didn't move. She didn't blink. I remember that part the most, how lifeless she looked, like she wasn't even really there. Like she wasn't real. Before either of us could say anything, the man pushed the car door open and got out. He moved fast, too fast, like he'd already made up his mind. His voice was loud, sharp, aggressive. Get in the fucking car. At first, we didn't move. It didn't make sense. Things like this didn't happen. We were just kids, walking down a road in the middle of nowhere. People didn't just pull up and try to take you. Then he lunged. His hands were huge, rough, and they closed around our necks like steel clamps. He grabbed both of us at the same time, yanking hard, dragging us towards the car. Everything after that was a blur of panic, pain, and confusion. He was hitting us, full-force punches from a grown man. Kicking, pulling, shoving. We were screaming, trying to get away, but he was so much stronger. I could barely breathe. My friend was fighting too, clawing at his hands, kicking at his legs, but it wasn't doing anything. He was just getting angrier. His grip tightened. My feet scraped against the ground, my shoes slipping on the gravel as he dragged me closer. The car door was open. The woman in the back seat still wasn't moving. She just watched, staring. I thought we were going to die. Then, out of nowhere, a van appeared. A work van, old and dented, coming up the road towards us. I didn't see the driver, didn't see how many people were inside, just saw movement through the windshield. The man holding us must have seen it too, because suddenly, his hands were gone. Just like that. 1 second he was crushing the air from my lungs, and the next, he was letting go. I hit the ground hard, the gravel scraping against my palms. My friend fell too, gasping, choking, scrambling away. The man didn't say anything. He just turned, got back in the car, and drove off, the tires kicking up dust as they sped down the road. The van stopped beside us. A group of trod eyes jumped out, yelling, asking if we were okay, what had happened. We couldn't answer. We were still in shock, shaking, trying to understand what had just happened. We were lucky. If that van hadn't come when it did, I don't know what would have happened. I don't want to know. After that day, everything changed. I never felt safe again. Even now, years later, I still find myself looking over my shoulder when I walk alone. I still feel that same sick, twisting fear whenever a car slows down near me. The feeling of his hands around my neck, the dead stare of the woman in the back seat, I can't forget it. I don't think I ever will. That day we were lucky, but I know that somewhere, someone else wasn't. I lived alone in a one-bedroom apartment in a rough part of town about 10 years ago. The rent was cheap, and it was close enough to my job that I could walk, which was a big deal since my car had broken down and I couldn't afford to fix it. The area wasn't the safest, but I kept my head down and tried not to draw attention to myself. Most of my neighbors were either working late shifts or just kept to themselves. It wasn't the kind of place where people looked out for each other. For months, I'd been having this nagging feeling that someone had been inside my apartment while I was out. Nothing obvious, no broken locks, no signs of forced entry. Just small things that felt off. I'd come home, and something wouldn't be exactly how I left it. A kitchen chair pulled out a little more than I remembered, a drawer slightly open. A bottle of shampoo moved to the wrong side of the bathtub. At first, I brushed it off. I smoked a lot of weed back then, and I figured I was just being paranoid. Whenever I brought it up to friends, they'd laugh and tell me I was just high and overthinking. I wanted to believe them, so I tried to ignore it. Then the fridge magnets started moving. I had a bunch of random ones, souvenirs from places I'd never been, a few joke ones, some from local pizza places. One day, I noticed that they were rearranged. Not just a little off, but completely different. A row that had been near the bottom was suddenly at the top. A magnet I swore had been on the left side was now on the right. I stood in front of the fridge for a long time, just staring, trying to convince myself that I had moved them and forgotten. But then I saw one I had never seen before. It was a business magnet for a towing company in another state. One I had never visited, one I had never heard of. My stomach dropped. That wasn't mine. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe a friend had put it there as a joke. Maybe I had grabbed it absent-mindedly from somewhere. I knew it didn't make sense, but I was trying so hard to convince myself that there was a normal explanation. Then I noticed something even worse. The cigarette butts in my ashtray weren't my brand. I was the only one who smoked in my apartment. My friends smoked too, but I always made them throw their butts in the trash, never in the ashtray. And even if one of them had used it without me noticing, none of them smoked this brand. I stared at the crushed-up filter, my hands starting to shake. Someone had been in my apartment. Someone had been comfortable enough to smoke in my apartment. I told my friends, but they still didn't believe me. They told me I was just high, that I was freaking myself out. Even when I called the police, they barely took me seriously. They let me file a report, but it felt like they were just humoring me. No forced entry, no missing valuables, no visible threats. What could they even do? They told me to call again if I actually saw someone. I didn't know what else to do. My lease still had months left on it, and I couldn't afford to break it. I decided I needed to catch whoever was doing this. One night, I borrowed my boyfriend's car and parked it a few blocks away so it wouldn't look like I was home. I turned off all the lights and sat in the dark waiting. I wasn't even sure what I was waiting for. I just needed to know if someone would actually come in. The minutes dragged by, and every sound in the building felt magnified. The pipes creaking, footsteps in the hallway, the hum of my refrigerator. I kept checking the clock on my phone. 45 minutes passed, and nothing happened. Then something in my gut told me to get out. I don't know how to explain it. It wasn't a noise, it wasn't a shadow. It was just this overwhelming feeling that I had to leave now. I grabbed my keys and walked out as casually as I could, my heart pounding. I didn't run, I didn't slam the door. I didn't want whoever was inside to hear me. I made it to the parking lot and got into my boyfriend's car before I finally looked back at my apartment. A huge, dark figure was climbing into my balcony. My stomach flipped, and I felt frozen in place. I could only see the outline, but it was massive, moving with purpose. I could see the shape of arms, legs, a head. It was a person, not some shadow or trick of the light. Someone was breaking into my apartment, and I had just been sitting inside waiting. If I had stayed even a few minutes longer, I don't know what would have happened. I drove straight to my boyfriend's place and told him everything. The next morning, I packed up my essentials and left. I didn't even bother trying to get my security deposit back. I just broke the lease and moved. I never went back, never found out who it was, never found out how long they had been watching me. Years later, I heard a story from a co-worker that made my blood run cold. She had been arguing with her husband over some missing keys. They had to go through the dealership to get a replacement for their car, and neither of them could remember who had lost them. A couple of days later, she went home in the middle of the day unexpectedly and found all of their electronics and valuables stacked in a pile in the living room, like someone had been getting ready to rob them. She called the cops immediately. When they searched the house, they found that someone had been living in their attic for months. They had 2 little girls. The thought of someone watching them, moving through their house while they slept, made me sick. I thought about the cigarette butts, the magnets, the feeling of something being just slightly off in my apartment. I thought about that shadow climbing into my home the night I left. I never found out who was in my apartment, but I know I was right. Someone had been there. Someone had been watching me. And if I hadn't trusted my gut that night, I might not be here to tell this story. I don't know when it started, but I know it's been happening for a long time. As a kid, I saw things that I couldn't explain. Shadows that moved where they shouldn't, shapes that didn't belong. They were never clear, never in full detail, but they were there. My parents used to say I had an overactive imagination, that I watched too many scary movies. Maybe I did, but that didn't explain why I saw them when I was just walking down the hall or playing outside. It got less frequent as I got older. By the time I was a teenager, it was rare. Sometimes I could go months without seeing anything. I started to believe it was all in my head. That was easier than accepting that it was real. I convinced myself it had been some kind of childhood phase. Maybe I was just more prone to seeing things when I was younger. But then, every once in a while, something would happen. Just enough to remind me that it wasn't completely gone. A glimpse of movement where there was no one. A figure in the dark that disappeared when I looked directly at it. I tried not to think about it too much. Then I met my girlfriend. We had been together for a few months when I first stayed over at her house. It was an old house, the kind that felt like it held memories in the walls. She had grown up there, so it was normal to her. The first time I saw it, it was out of the corner of my eye. Just a shadow, moving from one room to another. I turned my head, but nothing was there. I told myself it was a trick of the light, that my brain was just playing with me. But it kept happening. The more time I spent in the house, the more I noticed it. A dark shape passing by in my peripheral vision, sometimes just a flash, sometimes more defined. One night, I was sitting in the living room while my girlfriend was in the kitchen. The dog was lying on the floor next to me, half asleep. I wasn't thinking about anything, just scrolling on my phone, when I saw movement on the staircase. I looked up. There was something there. It wasn't just a shadow. It had shape, a twisted, hunched figure making its way down the steps like it was injured. My chest tightened, and for a second I couldn't breathe. Then it turned the corner and stopped. It leaned forward, just enough for me to see its face. It had eyes, dark, empty eyes that locked onto mine. It didn't move. It just stared. My hands felt cold. I couldn't speak, couldn't move. The dog let out a low whine and bolted out of the room, disappearing down the hall. That snapped me out of it. I blinked, and it was gone. I didn't tell my girlfriend. I didn't know how to bring it up. She already thought I was weird for not wanting to stay over too often. I started making excuses to avoid being alone in the house. But then I saw it again. This time, I wasn't frozen. I remembered something from when I was a kid, something I had figured out back then. If I focused hard enough, if I really concentrated, I could make them go away. It was like turning off a light in my mind. I had done it before, so I tried it again. I locked my eyes on the figure and focused with everything I had. Slowly, it started to fade. It didn't vanish all at once, just thinned out, like smoke dispersing in the air. And then it was gone. I thought that was the end of it. It wasn't. The next time I was alone in the house, I saw it again. It wasn't moving this time. It was just standing there, in the middle of the living room. It wasn't facing me. It was still, completely still, like it was waiting for something. I stared at it, and it turned its head toward me. I focused again, willing it to disappear. But this time, it didn't work. It faded for a moment, but then it came back. Stronger. It didn't move, didn't come closer, but it stayed. I left the house that day as quickly as I could. After that, it changed. I didn't always see it directly, but I could feel it. When I was alone in the house, it was there. I couldn't see it, but I knew it was standing behind me, breathing down my neck. The air felt heavier when I was alone. It got to the point where I didn't want to be in the house at all. I tried to explain it to my girlfriend, but she didn't understand. She thought I was making excuses, that I just didn't like staying over. But I wasn't the only one who had seen it. Her best friend had seen it too, long before I was ever in the picture. I didn't know that until the night we both saw it at the same time. We were sitting in the living room, talking, when she suddenly went pale. Her eyes darted behind me. I didn't have to ask. I already knew. I turned, but there was nothing there. When I looked back at her, she whispered, "You saw it too, didn't you?" I nodded. I tried taking pictures, using my phone, a Polaroid, anything. Nothing ever showed up. It was like it didn't exist. But I knew it did. Her friend knew it did. And every time I was alone in that house, I could feel it behind me. Watching. Waiting. I stopped going over unless I absolutely had to. If I did, I made sure someone else was there. I never stayed in the house alone again. Maybe it was just in my head. Maybe there was a logical explanation. But I don't think so. I don't think I imagined the way the air felt heavier, the way the dog reacted, the way her best friend saw it too. And I don't think I imagined the way it looked at me that first night on the stairs. I don't know what it is. I don't know why it's there. But I know one thing for sure. It's waiting for something. I had lived in that apartment for 2.5 years. It was a 4-bedroom place, and in that time, I had seen people come and go. Roommates moved in, roommates moved out. But I was the one constant, the only person who had stayed since the beginning. Nothing weird ever happened there. No strange noises, no odd occurrences. It was just a normal apartment in a normal building. That changed in the fall of my last year there. It started when the new girl moved in. I didn't think much of it at the time. She seemed quiet, mostly kept to herself, and went home on the weekends. There was nothing particularly strange about her. But looking back, that was when everything started. I loved horror movies. As soon as mid-August hit, I'd start my annual scary movie marathons. Friends would come over, we'd turn off all the lights, and we'd spend the night watching horror after horror. It was a routine, a tradition, and that's when things started happening. The first time, there were maybe 7 or 8 of us sitting in the living room watching a movie. I don't even remember which one it was. We had the door unlocked, like always. My neighbors were friendly, the kind of people who'd walk in unannounced, just like in sitcoms. So when the door slowly creaked open, I waited for someone to poke their head in. No one did. We all stared at the door. It had opened maybe a few inches, then just stopped. I got up, walked over, and looked out. The hallway was empty. No footsteps, no sound of doors closing, nothing. Just a silent, empty hallway. We shrugged it off. Probably just a draft. A few nights later, we decided to test it. We left the door unlocked again while we watched another movie. This time, we were waiting, watching, and sure enough, it happened again. The door creaked open, the same way it had before. Only this time, we were ready. My roommate, my boyfriend, and one of my neighbors all jumped up. We split up, ran down the stairs, checked both ends of the hall. Nothing. Not a single person in sight. That should have been it. Just a weird coincidence, an odd draft. something small and explainable. But then came the night we watched Paranormal Activity 3. We had been talking before the movie started, joking about how strange it was that the door kept opening. My boyfriend made an offhand comment, something like, "It would be creepy if the door not only opened but slammed shut." None of us thought much of it. We started the movie, the apartment was dark, the door was unlocked. Halfway through, the doorknob turned. It didn't just open this time. The knob turned. The door creaked open just as it had before. A few inches at first, then a little more. Then, as if someone had suddenly shoved it from the outside, it slammed shut. Hard. The whole apartment shook. A dry erase board we had on the wall crashed to the floor. It wasn't just a breeze. It wasn't a draft. Something had slammed that door closed with force. We sat frozen for what felt like forever. No one spoke. No one moved. Finally, someone turned on the lights, and we all rushed to the door. We threw it open. The hallway was empty. Silent. There was no one. Not a single person. We checked the stairwells, listened for footsteps, waited to hear doors closing in other apartments. Nothing. No one was there. None of us knew what to say. We stood there, trying to make sense of it, trying to find a reason. But there wasn't one. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't a draft. The door had opened before, but never like that. And it had never slammed. We tried to laugh it off, tried to make jokes, but the mood had changed. Someone muttered an apology to whatever or whoever was messing with us. Something about how we didn't mean to make it mad. We were just joking. We didn't know what else to do. A week later, the new girl, who hadn't been there for any of it, came back from one of her weekend trips. I was in my room when I heard her moving through the apartment, talking under her breath. The sound was strange, rhythmic, like she was repeating something over and over. When I stepped out, I saw her walking through the rooms, flicking water onto the walls and doorways. She had a small bottle in her hand. Holy water. She hadn't been there for any of it. We hadn't told her. But there she was, blessing the apartment, speaking in tongues, moving methodically like she had done it before. I didn't say anything, just stood there watching until she was done. When she finally stopped, she turned to me and said, "Something's wrong with this place." That was all she said. After that, nothing else happened. The door never opened again. No strange noises, no weird feelings. It was like whatever it was had stopped. I moved out at the end of the semester. I didn't keep in touch with the new girl, and I don't know if she ever experienced anything else after I left. Maybe it was just some strange coincidence. Maybe it was something more. I don't know. All I know is that for 2.5 years, nothing ever happened in that apartment. And then one day it did. I was 8 or 9 years old when this happened. It was a time when I still believed I was invincible, a time when I didn't yet understand how quickly things could go wrong. I loved riding my bike. It was my freedom, my way of exploring just beyond the edges of what my parents allowed. Every day, I would ride my bike to the corner of the busy road, just one street over from our house, to wait for my older brother's bus. He was in high school, and I loved when he got off, saw me waiting, and lifted me onto the handlebars of his bike to take me home. He always went fast, and I would laugh as the wind rushed past my face. It was one of the best parts of my day. That particular day, my dad had told me not to go. I don't remember why, but I remember feeling annoyed. It wasn't fair. I went every other day, so why should today be any different? I waited until no one was looking, grabbed my bike, and pedaled off down the street. The ride there felt normal. I weaved between the cracks in the pavement, dodged the stray leaves that had fallen from the trees, and kept my eyes on the road ahead. When I got to the corner, I parked my bike and stood next to it, waiting for the bus to pull up. The road was busy, like always. Cars zoomed past, the occasional truck rumbling by, the noise blending into a constant hum of engines and tires against asphalt. I stood there, watching, waiting, shifting my weight from one foot to the other, growing impatient. Then I saw them. A group of bikers, maybe 6 or 8 of them, riding in pairs, their motorcycles roaring as they passed. Their jackets were dark, their helmets reflecting the light of the sun. I watched them go, my eyes following their movement. There was something about them that made my stomach feel strange, but they didn't look at me, didn't slow down, didn't seem to notice me at all. So I stayed where I was. A few minutes passed. More cars went by. Then, another pair of bikers appeared. This time, something felt wrong the second I saw them. My body reacted before my mind could make sense of it. I froze. They rode side by side, just like the others, but as they passed, the one on the left suddenly turned his head toward me. His helmet tilted slightly, like he was getting a better look. Then, I saw him call out to his friend. He pointed at me. My stomach dropped. I didn't know why, but I knew. I knew they were going to come after me. They couldn't turn around right away. They were on the left side of the road, and I was on the right. There were too many cars. I saw them slow down. They were waiting. They were going to turn. I should have run into the gas station on the corner. It was right there. There were people inside. I should have dropped my bike and sprinted for the door. But I was a kid, and kids don't always think straight when they're scared. Instead, I jumped onto my bike and started pedaling. I didn't just ride fast. I rode as fast as my legs could possibly move. I pushed down on the pedals so hard I could feel my muscles burning, but I didn't stop. My heart was hammering in my chest, and my breath came in short, sharp bursts. I couldn't see anything around me anymore. Everything blurred into streaks of color and movement. The only thing I could think about was getting home before they could reach me. I don't remember the moment I passed out. 1 second I was riding, and the next there was nothing, just blackness. Then I smelled something, a strong, sharp smell that made my nose wrinkle. Fish. I opened my eyes. The world was sideways. No, I was sideways. I was lying in the street, near the small shop by my house. A woman was standing over me. She was holding something. A knife? No, a cloth. Her hands smelled like fish. There were scales on her fingers. She had been cleaning fish on her front porch when she saw me collapse. I blinked up at her. I tried to move, but my body wouldn't listen. My legs felt like they weren't mine. Then I heard the motorcycles. I turned my head, just in time to see them. They had turned onto the street. They were coming toward us. I still couldn't move. My chest felt tight. I was trapped in my own body. The woman saw them too. She didn't move away. She didn't run. She just stood there, her feet planted firmly on the ground, standing over me like a shield. The bikers slowed down. Halfway down the street, they stopped. Their engines rumbled, but they didn't come closer. They just stared at her. I held my breath. My heart was pounding so hard I thought they might hear it. Then, without a word, they turned. They rode away. I didn't move until they were completely gone. The woman waited a few more minutes, making sure they weren't coming back. Then she helped me up. My legs were shaky, but I could stand. She didn't take me home right away. She kept me hidden inside her house for a while, letting me sit in the dim kitchen, drinking water, waiting for my head to stop spinning. When she finally took me home, she didn't walk me through the main street. She led me through a narrow back lane, one I had never used before, making sure no one saw us. When I stepped through my front door, my dad looked at me. He knew. He didn't have to ask. I never went to meet my brother's bus again. Even now, as an adult, when I see a group of bikers riding together, I feel it. That same feeling in my stomach, that same chill along my spine. I don't know what would have happened if that woman hadn't been there. I don't want to know. But I do know one thing. I should have listened to my dad. That day, I learned that sometimes the things we think won't happen to us can happen. And when they do, there's no taking them back. The night started out normal. My parents had gone out for the evening, trusting me to stay home alone. I was 13, and while I wasn't exactly fearless, I liked to think I could handle a few hours by myself. The house was quiet, except for the occasional creaks and groans that old houses make when they settle. I had spent the evening watching TV, flipping between channels, not really focused on anything. Eventually, the weight of the day caught up with me, and I decided to head to bed. I turned off the TV, walked up the stairs, and left my bedroom door open just a little so I could have some light from the hallway. I wasn't scared of the dark, but it was comforting to have that little sliver of yellow light stretching across my floor. I got into bed, pulled the blanket up to my chest, and listened to the quiet hum of the house. My body was still, but my mind wasn't ready to switch off just yet. I stared at the ceiling, listening to nothing in particular, waiting for sleep to take over. Then I heard something. It was soft, barely noticeable at first, like a shuffle at the bottom of the stairs. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. My first thought was that it was my sister coming home late. I relaxed a little, figuring she was just trying to be quiet so she wouldn't wake me up. I waited, listening for her to move further into the house. But instead of footsteps walking across the hallway, I heard something else. A step. One step up the stairs. Then another. Slow, deliberate. I held my breath. My skin prickled with cold fear. I told myself it was my sister, that she was probably just being weird, trying to scare me. But something about the way the footsteps sounded didn't feel right. They were too slow, too deliberate, like someone was creeping, taking their time. Step. Another step. I turned my head toward the doorway. The light from the hallway stretched across my floor, but it didn't reach far enough for me to see the stairs. I strained my ears, waiting. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. Step. Then silence. Whoever it was had reached the landing. I could feel it, the presence of something just outside my door, just out of sight. My stomach clenched, and I squeezed the blanket in my fists. Every part of me screamed to get up, to lock the door, to hide. But I couldn't move. I just lay there, frozen, waiting, hoping I was wrong. Then I heard it. A whisper. Low. Raspy. Knock, knock, knock. A man's voice. Not my sister's. Not anyone I knew. Something inside me snapped. My body moved before my brain could catch up. I threw myself out of bed, ran to the door, and slammed it shut. My hands were shaking so badly I fumbled with the lock, but I managed to twist it. Then I stumbled backward, my legs feeling like they weren't mine. I sat on the floor, pressing my back against the bed, staring at the door, my chest rising and falling with ragged breaths. I listened. Every sound in the house was suddenly amplified, the hum of the fridge downstairs, the ticking of the hallway clock, the blood rushing in my ears. But there were no footsteps, no whispers, nothing. I don't know how long I sat there, but eventually, the fear drained just enough for exhaustion to take over. I crawled back into bed, pulling the blanket over my head, my whole body tense. I don't think I slept. I just laid there, waiting for the sun to rise, waiting for the sound of my parents' car in the driveway. When morning came, I told my parents everything. My dad checked the house, looked at the doors and windows. Everything was locked. Nothing seemed out of place. My mom frowned, but didn't say much. Then my sister came downstairs, rubbing her eyes, asking what was going on. I told her about the footsteps, the whisper. She stared at me for a moment, then shrugged. That was me, she said. Something in her voice felt off. It was too casual, like she had rehearsed it. My stomach twisted, but I let it go. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that there was a simple explanation, that it was all just some stupid prank. But about a week later, she pulled me aside. She wouldn't look at me. She kept fidgeting, playing with the hem of her sleeve. Mom told me to say it was me, she muttered. My whole body went cold. I stared at her, my mind racing, trying to piece together what that meant. If it wasn't her, then who was it? My parents never mentioned it again, and I didn't press them. I didn't want to know. I was so relieved when we moved. I never wanted to be alone in that house again. I never wanted to lie awake in the dark, listening for footsteps that shouldn't be there. About a year ago, my cousin stayed over at my place like she usually did. It wasn't anything unusual. She had stayed over so many times before that it had become routine. I only have one bed, so we always slept together, side by side, like we had 100 times before. Nothing ever felt off about it. It was comfortable, familiar, just another normal night. That night wasn't any different at first. We stayed up for a bit, talking in the dim light of my room, scrolling through our phones in comfortable silence until one of us got too tired to keep our eyes open. I remember feeling warm, wrapped up in my blanket, my body slowly sinking into sleep. It was quiet, except for the occasional sound of my cousin shifting beside me or the hum of the fan in the corner of the room. The kind of night where sleep comes easily, where the weight of the day disappears the moment your head touches the pillow. I don't know how long I had been asleep when it happened. At first, I thought I was dreaming. That strange, hazy feeling where you're aware of your surroundings, but they don't quite feel real. I felt a weight on the bed, like someone was moving, shifting their body on top of the mattress. My first thought was that my cousin had gotten up to use the bathroom and was now coming back to bed. It made sense, so I didn't react at first. But then, something felt different. Off. The movement wasn't just someone getting back into bed. It was slower, deliberate. I could feel the pressure shifting, something crawling towards me rather than settling into place. The weight moved closer, and then I felt something press down on me. Not just the mattress dipping under someone's weight, but actual hands. My wrists were pinned down. My chest felt heavy, like something, or someone, was lying directly on top of me. Fear hit me in a way that was instant and paralyzing. It wasn't just being unable to move. It was that deep, primal terror, the kind that makes your whole body go rigid. My breath caught in my throat. I tried to move, to shift, to do anything, but I couldn't. It was as if something was holding me down completely, keeping me in place. My heart was pounding, each beat heavy in my ears, a deep thudding sound that filled my head. And then the strangest thing, this overwhelming feeling of familiarity. Like I had felt this before. Like I had been here before. The fear wasn't just fear. It was wrapped in this bizarre sense of déjà vu. It made no sense, but it was there, settling into my stomach like a cold weight. I couldn't see anything. My room was dark, and my eyes were locked straight ahead, unable to move, unable to turn and look. But I could feel it. The presence. Something unnatural. Something that shouldn't have been there. My breath was shallow, my chest tight. The pressure was unbearable, like something was crushing me from above. And then suddenly, my cousin moved in her sleep. Just a small shift, the way someone does when they're rolling over, half awake. The moment she moved, everything stopped. The weight lifted, the pressure disappeared. I could move again, and I gasped, sucking in a deep breath as if I had been drowning. My body was trembling, my skin clammy with sweat. The fear was still there, lingering, but the presence was gone. I lay there frozen, my heart still hammering in my chest. My whole body felt exhausted, like I had just run a marathon. I didn't understand what had happened. I didn't want to understand. I forced myself to breathe, to calm down, to push the feeling away. I told myself it was just sleep paralysis. It had to be. It had happened before. I had read about it. It was just my mind playing tricks on me, my body caught between sleep and wakefulness. That's all it was. I didn't say anything. I didn't want to wake my cousin, didn't want to bring it up and make it real. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, waiting for my heart to stop racing. Eventually, exhaustion won, and I drifted back into uneasy sleep. The next morning, I didn't bring it up. I almost convinced myself that it was nothing, that it wasn't worth mentioning. But then my cousin turned to me, still groggy from sleep, and said, "Last night, I dreamed about a man with black wings standing in front of the bed, looking at you." The words sent a chill down my spine. I sat up, fully awake now, the uneasy feeling from the night, before rushing back in full force. "What?" I asked, my voice coming out quieter than I intended. She described him. The way he stood, the way his face looked. And I felt my stomach drop. She was describing my ex-boyfriend. The one who had hurt me, manipulated me, broken me down in ways I didn't want to remember. The one who had passed away a couple of years ago. I felt cold. My hands were shaking. My cousin didn't know all the details about him. Not really. She had never met him in person. And yet, somehow, she had seen him. She had dreamed about him standing there, watching me, in the exact spot where I had felt that presence, where I had felt something holding me down. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how to react. It didn't make sense. It shouldn't have made sense. But it did. And that was the worst part. I tried to shake it off, to push it aside, but the feeling lingered. That cold, sick fear. That heavy, suffocating pressure. It stayed with me for days, then weeks. Even now, I think about it sometimes. Maybe it was just sleep paralysis. Maybe it was just a dream. Maybe it was just a coincidence. But I don't sleep as easily as I used to. I've always been a night owl. Even as a kid, I struggled to fall asleep when everyone else did. There was something comforting about being awake while the world was silent. The darkness outside my window, the stillness in the house, the occasional hum of a refrigerator or a creak in the walls. All of it made me feel like I had stolen extra hours for myself. That summer, I had fallen into a routine. I would stay up all night playing video games, scrolling through random forums, and watching videos until my body couldn't take it anymore. Sometimes I'd crash before sunrise, but on this particular night, I had made it to 5 a.m., still wired, my brain buzzing from hours of screen time. I knew my mom hated it. She never liked the idea of me being awake all night while she and the rest of the house were asleep. She'd come up the stairs at random times just to make sure I was in bed. I had learned to be careful. The second I heard her footsteps, I'd turn off my monitor, get under the blanket, and pretend to be asleep. It had worked every time. That morning, I heard her coming up the stairs again. The wooden steps creaked under her weight, a slow, deliberate sound that I had memorized over the years. My heart sped up as I shut my eyes to a near squint, just enough to watch through my lashes without looking obviously awake. She walked past my bed like she always did, but then she did something different. Instead of stopping by my door to check on me, she reached for the handle of the next room, the one right across from mine. The room hadn't been used in years. It was supposed to be a guest room, but we never had guests. It ended up being storage, boxes piled against the walls, an old desk shoved into the corner, a bed with sheets that were barely ever changed because no one slept in it. My mom never went in there unless she needed something, and even then, she would just crack the door open and peek in. But this time, she fully opened the door, stepped inside, and closed it behind her. I waited, my heart thudding in my chest. It was weird. It was so unlike her. The door made its usual soft click as it shut. I kept listening, waiting for her to come out, maybe holding something she had gone in there to find. But there was nothing. No rustling, no footsteps, no sounds at all. Minutes passed. I told myself to stop being stupid. There was nothing strange about this. Maybe she was just organizing things. Maybe she had finally decided to clean up the room. Maybe she just needed a moment alone. But none of it made sense. I kept staring at the door, my skin crawling with something I couldn't explain. The more I thought about it, the more uneasy I felt. Then, after 5 minutes, I couldn't take it anymore. I sat up slowly, my blanket sliding off me. The room felt colder than before. I swung my legs over the edge of the bed and hesitated. Every part of me told me to leave it alone, to just go back to bed and pretend I hadn't seen anything. But I couldn't. My feet hit the floor, and I walked toward the door with careful, quiet steps. I hesitated one last time before reaching for the handle. My fingers wrapped around it, and I held my breath as I turned it. The latch clicked softly as I pushed the door open. The room was empty. I stood frozen in the doorway, my stomach twisting into a knot so tight it felt like I was going to be sick. The air in the room was stale, untouched. Nothing had been moved. The boxes were still stacked against the wall, the dust still undisturbed on the furniture. The bed was exactly as I remembered it, the old comforter slightly wrinkled from how it had been thrown over the mattress months ago. But there was no one inside. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. My mind raced, trying to piece together what I had just seen. I had watched my mom walk into this room. I had seen the door open. I had seen it close. I had waited, listening, expecting her to come out. But she had never been here. A cold, prickling feeling crawled up my back, settling deep into my spine. I backed away slowly, my legs unsteady. My skin felt too tight, like it didn't fit right anymore. My heartbeat was too loud, my breath too sharp. I turned, walked out, and shut the door as gently as I could, my fingers trembling against the wood. I didn't go back to bed. I didn't even sit down. I just stood there in my room, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself that I had imagined it, that my eyes had played a trick on me, that my brain, exhausted from hours of being awake, had made something up. But deep down, I knew what I had seen. I knew what I had heard, and I knew how clear it had been. Eventually, the sun started to rise. The first light crept in through my window, stretching across my floor. I don't remember falling asleep, but I must have, because the next thing I knew, it was noon, and my mom was calling me downstairs for lunch. I didn't ask her about it. I didn't want to. I was too afraid of what she might say. If she told me she had never been upstairs that morning, I wouldn't be able to handle it. And if she told me she had, if she insisted she had gone into that room, I still wouldn't have an answer for what I saw when I opened the door. To this day, I still don't know what happened that night. I've replayed it over and over in my head, searching for a logical explanation, but none of them feel right. It's been years, and I still remember it like it just happened. I still feel the same chill when I think about it. It's the only time in my life that I've truly questioned what my eyes saw, what my brain registered. The only time the darkness tricked me so well that even after all these years, I still don't know how to explain it, and I still don't sleep with my door open. When I was 7 years old, I was more religious than anyone in my family. We were Catholic, and we went to church most Sundays, but religion was never a major thing in our home. My dad had grown up religious. He was Puerto Rican, raised in a strict Catholic household, and I think he even considered becoming a priest when he was a teenager. By the time I was a kid, though, he wasn't particularly devout, just more religious than my mom, who mostly went to church because that was what we did. But for some reason, I latched onto religion in a way that confused my parents. I prayed every night, I memorized Bible verses, and I thought a lot about God in a way that no one else in my family did. My dad thought it was a little weird, but I think part of him was pleased by it. One Sunday at church, the pastor talked about divine visions. He told us about people who had seen angels, who had heard the voice of God, who had been chosen as vessels to deliver his message. I don't know why, but that idea completely fascinated me. I thought about it constantly. I pictured Mary appearing in a field, surrounded by golden light. I imagined the voices of angels speaking in soft, echoing tones. For weeks, I asked my dad about it, over and over. He didn't have much to say beyond what we had already learned in church, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. It felt important. It felt real. I remember sitting in my room one night, hands clasped, praying with all the sincerity that a 7-year-old could possibly have. I told God that if he wanted me to be a vessel, I was ready. If he had something to say, I would listen. A few nights later, I had a dream. I remember the feeling before I fell asleep, this weird sensation of heaviness, like my body was sinking into the mattress, like I was melting into the blankets. My limbs felt slow, my eyes felt thick and heavy. When I slipped into sleep, everything was white and foggy at first, like I was floating in a cloud. Then, little by little, the fog cleared, and I saw something in front of me. It wasn't a person, not exactly. It was an image, like an engraving, but three-dimensional, raised from a surface that looked like metal. It was an angel, its wings spread wide, its face peaceful. It was beautiful, but there was something about it that unsettled me. A voice spoke. It was a woman's voice, calm and slow, like an automated operator message on the phone. It wasn't warm, it wasn't kind, it was just smooth and steady. It said my name first, like it was making sure I was paying attention. Then it said something else. It is very important that you listen very carefully to what I am about to tell you. This is a message from God, and he needs you to remember it very carefully. Before she could say anything else, terror hit me like a wave. I had been so sure I wanted this, so sure I was ready, but suddenly I wasn't. I wasn't ready at all. I started crying, shaking my head, whispering, "No, no, not me, please, not me," over and over again. The voice kept speaking, calm and steady, but I couldn't hear the words over the sound of my own pleading. The image of the angel blurred and faded into the fog again, and then I woke up. My mom was standing over me, shaking my shoulder, looking worried. She said she had heard me crying in my sleep, making strange, distressed noises. She thought I was having a nightmare. I couldn't explain it to her. I just clung to her and tried to stop shaking. After that, I was afraid to go to sleep. For months, I had trouble falling asleep at night. I lay awake for hours, my stomach twisting with anxiety, dreading the possibility that I might have that dream again. Sometimes, as I started drifting off, I would see the image again, the angel, the metal, the fog, and the panic would hit me so hard that I would jerk awake, gasping, before the voice could start again. My mom was confused. I had always been a good sleeper, but now I was staying up late, crying, unable to tell her why. One night, she sat on the edge of my bed and asked me why I was so afraid. I told her about the dream. She looked disturbed, but told me it was just my imagination, just a dream, nothing more. She told me God wasn't trying to tell me anything. Eventually, the dream stopped. Little by little, I started sleeping normally again. After a while, I stopped thinking about it so much. As I got older, my fixation on religion faded. I never got confirmed. I stopped praying at night. Now, I don't really believe in anything. I think about that dream sometimes, and I wonder what I would have heard if I had listened, if I hadn't panicked, if I had just let the voice finish speaking. I'll never know. And honestly, I don't think I want to. I was sick, the kind of sick that makes you feel like you might not wake up the next morning. My body ached, my head burned, and every breath felt like it was dragging through a thick fog. It was 2007, and my grandfather was dying. My parents had rushed out of town to try and see him before it happened, leaving me alone in the house. I wasn't worried about being alone, at least, not at first. My sisters were at school, and I figured I would just spend the day in bed, flipping through TV channels, trying to ignore how miserable I felt. Maury was on, and I let it drone in the background, not really paying attention, just letting it distract me from how hot and clammy my skin felt. That was when I heard it, the faintest little cry, high-pitched and weak, like a newborn baby. I barely registered it, assuming it came from the TV, some audience member's kid or something. I ignored it, my eyes barely staying open as I stared at the screen. Then I heard it again. It was the same sound, but now that I was paying attention, something felt off. It didn't seem like it was coming from the TV. It was distant, but not muffled, like it was coming from inside the house. I muted the TV, staring at the screen while I listened. Silence. I let out a breath, convincing myself I was hearing things, that the fever was making my ears play tricks on me. Then it came again. This time, there was no mistaking it. It was inside the house. I sat up slowly, every joint in my body protesting, and turned toward my mom's room. The cry was coming from there. That made no sense. My mom had a crib in there because she used to babysit my sister's kid, but no one had used it in weeks. I swung my legs over the edge of the bed, the floor cold against my bare feet, and stood up, feeling like I might collapse. The sickness made my head swim, but I forced myself forward, step by step, until I was standing in my mom's doorway. I could hear it clearer now. The tiny sounds a newborn makes, soft, restless little noises, a weak cry followed by quiet whimpers. It was coming from the crib. My stomach twisted. There was no baby in that crib. I knew that. I knew it for a fact. But I could hear it, as if something was lying in there, shifting against the mattress, breathing in little hiccuping gasps. I took a step closer, my heart pounding in my chest, every inch of my skin covered in a thin layer of sweat. I reached out a shaking hand, fingers hovering over the edge of the crib, when suddenly a sharp sound cut through the air, something falling, glass shattering. I jerked back, spinning toward the dresser. A photo had fallen to the floor, the glass in its frame cracked down the middle. It was an old picture of my mom and my grandma. My breath caught in my throat. I had no idea how it fell. The dresser was solid, not wobbly, and the frame had been sitting there for years without moving. There was no breeze, no draft, no reason for it to have suddenly tipped over. I stared at it, my pulse pounding in my ears, the weight of something unseen pressing down on me. I felt sick in a way that had nothing to do with my fever. The room was silent now. No baby noises, no crying. Just the ringing in my ears and the sound of my own breathing. I didn't think. I turned and bolted out of the house, my legs weak and trembling as I ran next door to my older sister's place. I didn't care how ridiculous I looked, showing up pale, sweaty, and barefoot. I just needed to be out of that house. She was on the phone when I burst through the door, so I stood there, trying to catch my breath, waiting for her to hang up. My heart was racing, my whole body was shaking, and I still couldn't process what had just happened. I kept replaying it in my head. The sound of the baby, the photo falling, the silence that followed. None of it made sense, and the more I thought about it, the worse I felt. Then my sister hung up, turning to me with a strange look on her face. Grandpa just died like 5 minutes ago. A cold chill ran through me. 5 minutes ago. The exact time I had heard the last cry. The exact time the photo had fallen. I swallowed hard, my mouth dry, my mind racing for an explanation that made sense. But there was nothing. Just the sick, heavy feeling that settled deep in my chest. The certainty that something had happened in that house. Something I would never be able to explain. I stayed at my sister's place for a while, too shaken to go back home alone. When my parents came back later that night, I told them about it. My mom went quiet, her face pale, and I could tell she didn't know what to say. No one did. There was no explanation, no logical reason. Just a feeling, a connection between moments, something unseen moving through that house in the minutes my grandfather left this world. I never heard the crying again. The crib stayed empty after that, collecting dust until my mom finally took it down. But every time I passed her dresser, I looked at that photo, the crack in the glass still there, a reminder of that day. A reminder that some things, no matter how real they feel, will never have an answer. When I was 12, my best friend and I were always looking for trouble. We lived in a small town in Wisconsin, the kind of place where summer days stretched endlessly, and the biggest excitement we could find was whatever we made for ourselves. We rode our bikes everywhere, tearing through the streets like we owned them, searching for something, anything, that would make our little town feel less boring. It was the kind of summer where we didn't think about consequences, where we felt invincible, where we thought we knew everything. One afternoon, my friend told me about a warehouse he had heard about. Some dollar store had gone out of business, and all their leftover inventory was just sitting there. He had found a way in, or so he claimed, and figured it would be easy to sneak inside and grab some stuff. It wasn't about stealing. Not really. We weren't looking to get rich. It was just the thrill of it, the idea of doing something we weren't supposed to. The thought of digging through piles of abandoned merchandise, stuffing our pockets with whatever we found, felt like the kind of adventure we had been waiting for all summer. So without thinking twice, we jumped on our bikes and pedaled toward the warehouse. The building was on the edge of town, past an old train yard and behind a row of storage units. It was bigger than I expected, a dull gray block of concrete with metal doors and a few high windows covered in grime. My friend led the way, showing me the small window he had found. It was just big enough for us to squeeze through, and it had already been broken. Whether it was from him or someone else, I didn't ask. I just followed him in. Inside, the air was thick with dust, and the only light came from the windows high above. The place smelled stale, like old cardboard and something faintly chemical. Rows of tall shelves lined the room, packed with unopened boxes. Some had been torn open, their contents spilling onto the floor. Cheap plastic toys, bags of candy, stacks of off-brand kitchenware. It was a graveyard of things no one wanted, just sitting there waiting. We wandered through the aisles, poking through the boxes, laughing at the junk we found. My friend stuffed his pockets with fake gold rings, slipping them onto his fingers like he was some kind of king. I grabbed a few packs of Laffy Taffy, the kind with sprinkles on them, the kind I had never seen before. It was stupid, really, but at the time it felt like we were pulling off something huge. Then we heard it, the heavy clang of a metal door opening. We both froze. For a second, we just stared at each other, our hands still buried in the boxes. Then my friend whispered, "Hide." He slipped behind the door, pressing himself against the wall. I looked around desperately, my heart pounding in my chest. There was nowhere to go, nowhere except for a small closet against the wall. I darted inside, crouching down, trying to make myself as small as possible. But there was no door, no real cover. If they looked inside, they would see me. There was nothing I could do but stay still and pray they wouldn't. Footsteps echoed through the warehouse. Two voices, men, talking, their words sharp and angry. "Someone's been getting in here," one of them said. "If I catch whoever it is, I'm gonna beat the hell out of them." I felt my whole body go cold. I held my breath, my hands pressed against the floor to stop them from shaking. My legs felt like they were going to give out beneath me, but I didn't move. I barely even blinked. The men walked past, their voices getting closer. I could hear the rustle of boxes being moved, the scrape of their boots against the floor. My mind raced with worst-case scenarios. If they found us, what would happen? Would they call the cops? Would they actually hurt us? I didn't know, but I wasn't about to find out. They were there for what felt like forever, talking about inventory, about security, about making sure those little shits never came back. I wanted to run, to get out of there so badly, but I couldn't move. I could barely even breathe. Finally, their voices started to fade. Their footsteps moved toward the door. The heavy clang of metal sounded again, and then silence. I didn't move right away. I stayed there, crouched in the closet, listening. My friend stayed behind the door, just as frozen as I was. Neither of us spoke, not even in whispers. We just waited, making sure they were really gone. Minutes passed, but it felt like hours. My legs ached, my heart still hammered in my chest, but I didn't dare shift. Then, slowly, we crept out of our hiding spots. I could see the fear in my friend's face, mirroring my own. Without a word, we moved, our steps careful and silent. We made our way back to the window, lifting ourselves up and squeezing through as quickly as we could. Once we were outside, we didn't waste a second. We ran to our bikes, hopped on, and pedaled as fast as we could, our tires kicking up dust and gravel as we tore out of there. We didn't stop until we were halfway across town. Only then did we pull over, gasping for breath, looking at each other with wide, wild eyes. We didn't need to say anything. We both knew we had gotten lucky. Too lucky. That was the first and last time I ever broke into a building. The thrill, the excitement, it wasn't worth the fear that had gripped me in that closet. I never wanted to feel that way again. Still, as we sat there on our bikes, trying to calm down, I reached into my pocket. My fingers closed around the pack of Laffy Taffy. I pulled it out, tore it open with shaking hands, and took a bite. Even through the adrenaline, the fear, the lingering nausea in my stomach, I remember thinking one thing. Damn, this is good. It was the kind with sprinkles on it. I never found that kind again. When I was 14, I spent a lot of time on my computer. It was an old desktop, nothing fancy, but it ran Command and Conquer, Tiberian Sun, and that was all I really needed. My setup was in the living room, positioned in a way that had me facing the wall while my back was to the front door. That door was made of glass, letting in sunlight during the day, and at night, it turned into a black mirror. It was summer mid-afternoon, and the house was quiet except for the hum of the computer and the occasional distant sound of cars passing by. I was fully absorbed in my game, mindlessly clicking, planning out my strategy, when a strange feeling came over me. It was like the air in the room had changed, heavier, like the atmosphere before a thunderstorm. The temperature hadn't dropped, but I felt a chill deep in my stomach. The feeling was familiar, though I couldn't place why. It was the sensation of being watched. At first, I ignored it, brushing it off as nothing. But it persisted, a slow, creeping unease that made my skin feel tight. I told myself it was just paranoia, but my instincts were screaming at me to turn around. And so I did. My head turned first, then my body followed. My eyes landed on the glass door. At first, I thought it was just a shadow, something outside casting a weird reflection. But then I realized it wasn't a shadow at all. There was someone standing there. The figure was tall, too tall. The door itself was standard-sized, but this person, this thing, had to bend at the waist to look inside. It stood right beside the door, its body angled slightly, as if peering in at me. My breath caught in my throat. It was dressed in something heavy, a coat or a jacket maybe. The fabric was thick, almost bulky, with a high collar that obscured part of its neck. And the hat. An old-fashioned hat, like the kind you'd see in old movies, wide-brimmed and slightly tilted. But the worst part? The face, or lack of one. I couldn't see any features, no eyes, no mouth, no nose. Just blackness. Not like a mask or a hood, just emptiness. And yet I knew, without a doubt, that it was looking directly at me. My body locked up, every muscle tensed, frozen in place. My hands, still on the mouse and keyboard, had gone clammy. I wasn't breathing. I realized that if I moved too suddenly, if I acknowledged it too much, something might happen. I didn't know what, but the fear was primal, instinctual. I turned back to my screen, staring at my game, but not seeing it. I felt my heart pounding in my ears. I swallowed, trying to steady my breath, trying to act normal, as if that thing wasn't standing just a few feet away, separated by nothing but glass. Minutes passed, maybe seconds. It felt like forever. The longer I sat there, the more I felt like it was waiting for something, watching for a reaction. I couldn't bring myself to turn around again, but eventually I had to. I had to make sure it was real, that I wasn't losing my mind. I forced myself to look. It was gone, just the empty yard outside. Sunlight, trees, the road in the distance. Nothing out of the ordinary. The unease didn't leave, though. It sat heavy in my chest, like something pressing down on me. The air still felt wrong. I turned off my computer. I didn't want to sit there anymore. Didn't want my back to that door. I went to my room, locked the door behind me, and sat on my bed listening. I don't know what I was expecting to hear, but I listened anyway. Nothing came. Just the usual creaks of the house, the occasional distant sound of someone mowing their lawn down the street. For the rest of the day, I couldn't shake the feeling. Even as I forced myself to go about things as usual, I felt unsettled. It wasn't until later that evening, when my dad came home, that I started to relax. Having someone else in the house made it feel safer, less exposed. I almost convinced myself I had imagined it. Almost. That night, I made sure the blinds were shut tight. I turned my desk so that I wouldn't have my back to the door anymore. I told myself it was just to feel more comfortable while playing, but deep down, I knew the real reason. I never told anyone about it. What would I even say? That I saw something that wasn't quite a person? That I felt something watching me? That for a few terrifying moments, I thought something was going to happen, and I still don't know what. It's been years since that day, and I've never seen it again. But every now and then, I still get that feeling, that creeping sensation of being watched. And when I do, I never turn my back to the door. I've lived in the same house my entire life. I know it better than I know anything else. Every creak, every draft, every sound the house makes, I've heard it 1,000 times. I can tell when my dad is walking down the hall by the weight of his footsteps. I can tell when the wind outside is making the walls groan, or if it's just the pipes settling. I know the way light moves through the house at different times of the day, the way the sun sets behind the trees in the backyard, and how the shadows stretch long and thin against my bedroom walls as night comes in. But there are some things I can't explain. It started when I was little, though I don't remember the first things myself. My parents told me I used to cry in my crib, like any normal baby, but before they could reach me, I would stop. Not just stop crying, but go silent and then start smiling, as if something or someone had already comforted me. They brushed it off as me being an easy baby, but the older I got, the more strange things started happening. By the time I could talk, I apparently told my mother not to worry because the man in the rocking chair kept me safe. That chair had belonged to my grandfather. He had sat in it every day until he passed away from a heart attack. The chair stayed in my room, untouched, and when I was old enough to understand, my mother told me about what I had said. She asked me if I remembered anything, but I didn't. I wish I did, but I don't. That was just the beginning. My dad has always been uneasy when he's outside cutting the grass. He's mentioned, more than once, that he feels like he's being watched. I've seen him glance over his shoulder suddenly, as if expecting to see someone there. At first, he laughed it off, but the longer we lived here, the less he laughed about it. Now, he doesn't talk about it at all, but I still catch him looking behind him when he's mowing the lawn. Sometimes, he even stops and just stands still, like he's listening to something. But when I ask him about it, he waves it off. When I was about 7, I had this plastic Godzilla toy. It had a button on its chest that, when pressed, made its torso spin and its head roar. One night, long after I had gone to bed, it went off by itself. It was sitting on my dresser, untouched, and suddenly the roar echoed through my room. I was frozen, too scared to move. It wasn't a toy that was easy to trigger, no loose parts, no motion sensor, just a simple button. But that night, it roared on its own. I didn't sleep at all. In the morning, I checked it, pressing the button over and over. It still worked the way it was supposed to, but it never went off by itself again. I never figured out what made it do that in the middle of the night. My dad has seen a woman in a red dress walking down the hallway towards his bedroom. He's mentioned it a few times, usually late at night when he's tired and not really thinking about what he's saying. He says he only catches a glimpse of her before she disappears, and he's never seen her face. He doesn't like talking about it. My mom doesn't believe him, but I do. The most unsettling thing happened just a month ago. I got home late from work, close to 2 in the morning. The house was quiet, dark, the way it always is that late at night. I locked the front door behind me, kicked off my shoes, and headed upstairs. Our second floor is small, just a bathroom in the middle, my sister's room on one end of the hallway, mine on the other, with the staircase between us. As I reached the stairs, I saw someone coming down toward me. I thought it was my sister. The shape, the way it moved, everything about it looked right. I stepped aside to let her pass, not really paying attention. I even mumbled something to her, half asleep, expecting her to brush past me. But she didn't. As soon as the figure reached me, it disappeared. Not like it turned a corner or faded away. It was just there 1 second and gone the next. I was left standing in the dark, my heart hammering in my chest, my breath caught in my throat. I turned the light on, my hands shaking, and looked around. Nothing. The hallway was empty. My sister's door was closed. I even checked inside her room. She was fast asleep, curled up under her blankets. She hadn't come down the stairs. She hadn't moved at all. I didn't sleep that night. I just lay in bed, staring at my door, listening to the silence of the house. I wanted to believe I had imagined it, that it was just exhaustion playing tricks on me. But it didn't feel like a trick. It felt real. As real as anything else I've ever seen in my life. I don't know what I saw that night. I don't know why my dad feels like he's being watched in the yard, or why he's seen a woman in a red dress, or why my toy went off by itself when I was 7. I don't know why I stopped crying as a baby before my parents could reach me, or why I told my mom about a man in a rocking chair keeping me safe. All I know is that I've lived in this house my entire life, and some things about it just don't make sense. They never have. I was house sitting for my neighbor a few years back. They had asked me to stay the night, watch over their 3 dogs, and make sure everything was okay while they were away for the weekend. It was a quiet, secluded area. Dense woods stretched for miles behind the house, and the nearest neighbor was almost a half-mile down the road. It wasn't my first time watching the house, but something about being alone in that big, empty place always put me a little on edge. The night started off like any other. I made sure the doors were locked, let the dogs out one last time, and settled into the guest bedroom upstairs. The house was old, the kind that creaked and groaned in the wind, but I had stayed there enough times to know the difference between normal house noises and something that didn't belong. The 3 dogs, a golden retriever, a lab mix, and a small terrier, were all curled up in their usual spots, dozing peacefully. The room was dimly lit by the glow of my phone as I mindlessly scrolled, my eyelids growing heavier with each passing minute. Just as I was starting to drift off, I heard it, a noise from downstairs. It wasn't loud, more like a dull thump, the kind of sound that could easily be dismissed as the house settling. My heart gave a small jump, but I told myself it was nothing. I listened for a few seconds longer, but the house was silent. Shaking it off, I turned on my side and closed my eyes. Then another sound. This time it was clearer. A shuffle, followed by a dull clunk. My body tensed, every sense suddenly on high alert. The dogs, who had been fast asleep just moments ago, jerked their heads up at the exact same time. Their ears were pricked, eyes locked toward the doorway. A low, rumbling growl escaped from the golden retriever's throat, and the other 2 quickly followed. I tried to move, but I couldn't. My body refused to respond. My arms, my legs, even my fingers, I couldn't will them to budge. A wave of sheer panic flooded through me as I realized what was happening. Sleep paralysis. I had experienced it a few times before, but never like this. My chest felt heavy, like something was pressing down on me, pinning me in place. The only part of me that could move were my eyes, darting frantically around the room, taking everything in. Another sound. This time, I could tell exactly where it was coming from, the breezeway porch that led to the back door. The noise was unmistakable. Someone was outside. My breathing came fast and shallow, my mind racing through every possibility. The house was isolated. Nobody should be here. Then the doorknob rattled. A sharp, deliberate movement. The dogs exploded. They leapt from the bed and bolted toward the closed-off door leading to the stairway, barking and snarling in a frenzy. Their claws scraped against the hardwood, tails rigid, their bodies pressed against the door as if trying to force their way through. The sheer aggression in their barks sent a fresh wave of terror through me. They weren't barking at nothing. They weren't barking at the wind. There was someone down there. I tried again to move, to force my limbs to work, but nothing happened. My body remained locked in place, frozen under an invisible weight. My phone was within reach, sitting on the bedside table, but it might as well have been a mile away. My mind screamed at me to do something, anything, but I was utterly helpless. The noises continued. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving across the wooden porch. The person, whoever they were, hadn't been scared off by the dogs. They were still there, listening, watching. My stomach twisted into knots. The barking continued, filling the entire house with deafening noise. The lab mix began throwing its body against the door, each thud sending vibrations through the walls. The golden retriever's growls deepened, turning into something almost primal. The terrier, the smallest of the 3, yapped in a high-pitched frenzy, its small body trembling with tension. Then everything stopped. The rattling, the shuffling. Even the dogs seemed to hesitate, their barking trailing off into uneasy whimpers. The house fell into silence so absolute that I could hear the pounding of my own heartbeat in my ears. I waited. 5 seconds. 10. 20. Nothing. Slowly, painfully, I felt the paralysis start to fade. My fingers twitched first, then my arms, then my legs. I sucked in a shaky breath, flexing my hands to make sure I had control again. My entire body was trembling. The dogs stood rigid by the door, their ears perked, still alert but no longer growling. I forced myself to sit up. My limbs felt like lead, sluggish and unsteady. I grabbed my phone, my hands slick with sweat as I unlocked it. The urge to call someone, anyone, was overwhelming, but who would I call? The police? And tell them what? That I heard noises outside and the dogs barked? That I had been paralyzed and unable to move? No. If someone had been out there, they were gone now. I stayed awake for the rest of the night, sitting upright in bed, phone gripped tightly in my hands. Every tiny sound sent my heart hammering against my ribs. The dogs eventually settled down, curling back into their spots, though their ears still flicked at the slightest noise. When morning finally came, I forced myself to check the house. The doors were still locked. There was no sign of forced entry, no footprints on the breezeway, no indication that anyone had been there. And yet, I knew what I had heard. I knew what the dogs had reacted to. I never told my neighbors what happened. I never even mentioned it. But I never agreed to house sit for them again. And every time I pass that house, even now, I feel a chill crawl up my spine, remembering the night I lay helpless in that bed, knowing someone was out there, just on the other side of the door. I had always been curious about my friend's house. It was one of those old places that looked like it had a history, the kind of house that creaked even when no one was moving. It had 3 levels, with the main living areas on the first floor, bedrooms on the second, and a creepy attic on the third. Her bedroom was bigger than mine, which I always envied, but it had this weird little storage closet above her bed, more like a hole in the wall than a real closet. She used it for old toys and clothes, things she didn't need, but didn't want to throw away. She had told me before that she thought her house was haunted, or at least that something was there. She wasn't sure if it was a ghost or some kind of presence watching over her, but she had stories, and I wanted to hear them. One night, we were hanging out in her room, and she told me about the time she woke up to a sound coming from the closet. It was an old toy, one of those wind-up ones that plays music and slowly spins. She hadn't touched it in years. She had woken up to the sound of it playing, the tinny music echoing in the quiet of the night. She was too afraid to move at first, just laying there in the dark, staring at the closet. It played for a little while, then stopped. Just as she started to think maybe she had imagined it, it started again. She panicked, sat up in bed, and tried to tell whatever was making it happen to stop. She even tried climbing into the closet to turn it off herself, but she couldn't reach it. Eventually, it stopped on its own. It wasn't the only weird thing that had happened. Her pets, 2 cats and a dog, would sometimes all sit and stare at the same corner of her room, completely focused. She said it gave her chills every time. We had tried recording things before, setting my phone to record audio in the attic while we hung out downstairs. We never expected much, but we got more than we bargained for. The first recording we ever made was the one that freaked us out the most. We were the only ones on the second floor, and her dad was napping on the couch downstairs. When we played the recording back, we heard something that made our blood run cold. A voice, a woman's voice, clear as day, saying my friend's name. It wasn't either of us, and it wasn't her dad. The voice was sharp, almost like someone calling for her from another room, but we had been together the whole time. We listened to it over and over, trying to explain it away, but there was no way around it. It was real, and it wasn't the only thing we caught. There were other sounds, footsteps moving across the attic floor, things shifting around, even what sounded like someone coughing or sneezing. None of it made sense. We kept trying. We left my phone recording in the attic again and again, hoping to capture more. Sometimes we did. Other times we got nothing. But the feeling of unease in her house never went away. One night, we decided to take it a step further. Instead of just leaving a recording, we went up to the attic ourselves. I had never been up there before, and I could see why she didn't go often. It was cramped, filled with old furniture, boxes, and things left behind from previous owners. It smelled musty, like dust and wood that had soaked up the years. We stood there in the dim light, the single bare bulb casting long shadows. The air felt thick, like the attic was holding its breath. We didn't hear anything at first. Then a noise, a soft, deliberate shuffle, like someone moving just out of sight. We froze. I strained to listen, my heart pounding. Then another sound, something small tumbling off a shelf and hitting the floor. My friend grabbed my arm, and we both bolted, running down the attic stairs as fast as we could. We shut the door behind us and just stood there, breathing hard, trying to make sense of what had just happened. We went back later, with the lights on this time, but nothing had moved. The thing that had fallen was still there, a small box that could have shifted on its own. But the shuffling sound, that wasn't our imagination. We both heard it. After that, we didn't go into the attic much. The recordings continued, though. More footsteps, more random noises, more things we couldn't explain. Her house still gave me the creeps, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. I wanted to record more, to figure out what was really happening. But the truth was, we never found an answer. We never figured out what was causing the sounds or the voice on the recording. We just knew that something was there, something that didn't want to be seen, but made sure we knew it was there. My friend still lives in that house. She still hears things sometimes, and I still get chills every time I think about it. When I was around 14 or 15, I spent weekends at my dad's house in Magnolia, Texas. My parents were divorced, so I only got to see him on weekends. The house was a small, simple place, a little rundown, but nothing out of the ordinary. It was surrounded by woods, and the nearest neighbors were far enough away that if you screamed, no one would hear it. When I arrived that Friday evening, my stepmom greeted me at the door. She wasn't the type to joke much, so when she started telling me about the strange things that had been happening, I could tell she wasn't making it up for fun. She told me how my dad had seen a woman in white standing at the edge of the porch light's reach while he was outside smoking. He had seen her more than once, always standing just beyond the light, floating, not walking. He never stayed out long after that. But the last time it happened, she moved toward him faster than she should have been able to, closing the distance in a blink. He rushed inside, pale and shaken. She also mentioned other strange things. Phantom headlights would appear in the driveway, the sound of cars pulling up, the soft crunch of gravel under tires, the sound of people getting out, doors shutting, muffled voices. But when they checked, no one was there. Footsteps would echo on the porch, but when they looked through the window, nothing. It had been happening for a while now, but recently it was getting worse. I wasn't sure what to think. Ghost stories never sat well with me, and hearing something like this right when I arrived made my skin crawl. Still, I figured it was just one of those things that would sound scary at first, but wouldn't really amount to much. That night, around 9, the phantom cars started. The first time, I heard the gravel shift outside, followed by the low rumble of an engine. It sounded exactly like someone had pulled in, but when I looked outside, the driveway was empty. 10 minutes later, it happened again. Then again. It kept happening, increasing in frequency, until it reached 5 times in half an hour. Each time, I expected to see something, headlights, movement, anything. But there was nothing, just the sound of cars that weren't there. Eventually, my dad and stepmom went to bed, leaving me alone in the living room. The house had large windows that overlooked the front porch and yard. The blinds covered most of them, but not entirely. I tried to distract myself, watching TV with the volume low, trying to ignore the feeling creeping up the back of my neck. Around midnight, that feeling shifted. It was subtle at first, just a prickling unease, like I was being watched. It wasn't outside anymore, not from the porch or the driveway. It was closer. By 1 in the morning, I was sure there were people on the porch. I couldn't see them, but I could feel them, the same way you know someone is standing behind you before you turn around. I refused to look. I told myself I was imagining it. By 3, I knew they were inside. I didn't hear footsteps. I didn't hear the door open, but I could feel them in the room with me. The air was thick, heavy. My skin felt too tight. I didn't move. I barely breathed. It felt like if I moved, something terrible would happen. My body was locked in place, but my mind was screaming, begging me to get up, to run. But where? I couldn't go to my dad's room. That meant crossing the living room. I couldn't go outside. That meant facing whatever was out there. I don't know how, but at some point, I fell asleep. It wasn't a peaceful sleep. I dreamt of strange things, vague and unsettling, flashes of things I couldn't fully grasp. I had been reading Beowulf earlier that day, and bits of it bled into my dreams, distorted and wrong. The next thing I knew, it was morning. My stepmom was already up. The first thing she said was that she thought a storm had hit the house overnight. When she woke up, she heard what sounded like a hurricane ripping through the living room. Glass breaking, people screaming, heavy things slamming against the walls. Her bedroom door shook like something was trying to get in. She stayed in bed, too scared to move, waiting for it to pass. But when she finally came out, the house was still. Nothing was out of place. The furniture was where it had always been. No broken glass, no dents in the walls. And I was still there, sleeping peacefully on the couch like nothing had happened. That morning, I stepped onto the porch and saw something that made my stomach drop. A massive flock of crows was circling the yard, low to the ground, moving in slow, wide loops. There were dozens of them, maybe more. It wasn't normal. Birds don't move like that, not that close to the ground. It felt wrong, unnatural, like something had drawn them there. My dad left shortly after. He didn't say much about it, just that he had work to do. I could tell he wanted to get away from the house. I didn't blame him. I never figured out what really happened that night. Maybe it was just my mind playing tricks on me. Maybe the sounds my stepmom heard were just dreams bleeding into reality. Maybe the crows were just crows, but it didn't feel that way. I never stayed at that house again without feeling like I was being watched. I never saw anything, but that feeling never left. And to this day, I still wonder if whatever was there that night ever really left. I usually keep my window open when I sleep. It helps with the airflow, and since I'm on the first floor, but with the window about 10 feet up from the ground, I never really worried about it. Last night started like any other. I had my blanket half off me, the night air coming in through the open window, and my mind drifting in and out of sleep. You know that strange state where you're not fully asleep, but also not really awake. That's where I was. The kind of half-dreaming state where thoughts don't make much sense, but you're aware of your body enough to know you're in bed. Then I felt it, a sudden hit against my back. It wasn't forceful enough to hurt, but it wasn't soft either. A deliberate push, enough to snap me out of whatever haze I was in. My eyes opened wide, and for a second, I just lay there frozen, trying to process what had just happened. My first instinct was to assume it was a dream or some weird muscle spasm, but something about it felt real. Too real. I turned my head slightly, expecting to see nothing but the dim light of my room. And that's when I noticed something off. My window was closed. That didn't make sense. I always left it open at night, and I definitely hadn't gotten up to close it. My heart started to pound as I tried to rationalize it. Maybe my friend had come in and closed it for some reason. Maybe the wind had somehow forced it shut. I sat up slowly, my body still stiff from sleep, and turned toward the window. That's when I saw him. A man, standing in my neighbor's yard. He wasn't just standing there normally, though. His body was facing forward, but his head was turned toward me, just watching. My stomach tightened, and I felt a slow wave of cold spread through my chest. It was dark outside, but the faint glow of a street lamp cast just enough light for me to make out his shape. His posture was stiff, unmoving, and I could barely make out something in his hands. A wooden plank. I didn't move. I just kept staring. My mind was trying to make sense of it, trying to convince myself I wasn't really seeing this. I was still half asleep, maybe imagining things. But as the seconds stretched on, I knew I wasn't. Slowly, carefully, I reached for the window latch. I wasn't sure what I was doing. Maybe just trying to reassure myself that it was, in fact, locked. My fingers brushed against the metal, and in that instant, I felt a rush of panic. Had he closed it? Had he been in my room? I had to look away from him for just a second, just to check the lock. When I looked back outside, he was gone. The yard was empty. Just a quiet, dark lawn and the silhouette of my neighbor's house. My breathing was shallow. My skin was crawling. I didn't move for a long time, just staring at the spot where he had been. I tried to listen, tried to hear if there were footsteps, movement, anything, but the night was dead silent. I pulled the blanket around me, trying to slow my breathing, trying to think. Had I imagined it? Maybe my brain was still tangled in half-sleep, playing tricks on me. But the closed window told me otherwise. For the rest of the night, I didn't sleep. I sat in bed, staring at the window, watching the yard. Every small noise made me jump. Every shadow felt like it was moving. Morning came slow, and when the first light crept through my blinds, I finally forced myself to get up. I checked the window. The lock was engaged. I knew I hadn't locked it myself. I stepped outside to get a better look at my neighbor's yard. There was nothing there. No footprints, no sign that anyone had been standing there. But when I turned to check the ground below my window, my stomach dropped. There were scuff marks on the wall. Faint, but definitely there. Scrapes that trailed up toward my window, as if someone had tried to climb up. I stared at them for a long time, my heart hammering. Someone had been there. Someone had tried to get in. I went back inside and locked every door and window in my apartment. I didn't tell anyone. What would I even say? That I think someone was in my room, but I wasn't sure? That I felt something hit me, but maybe it was my imagination? But that's the part that keeps bothering me the most. The hit on my back. I know what I felt. And no matter how much I try to convince myself it wasn't real, my gut tells me otherwise. I don't think I was dreaming. I think someone was in my room, and they made sure to close the window behind them. I grew up in Idaho, and my family spent a lot of time outdoors. Camping, hiking, fishing. That was just part of life. We never really thought much about the dangers in the woods beyond the usual warnings about bears, cougars, or the occasional moose. But when I was 16, I had an experience that stuck with me, something that made me understand just how small I really was in the wild. That summer, my family went on a trip to a lake deep in the forest. It wasn't one of those well-maintained campgrounds with fire pits and bathroom facilities. It was remote, a place we had to reach by driving for miles on a winding dirt road before hiking in with our gear. The lake itself was stunning, surrounded by thick pine forest, with water so clear you could see the fish swimming below. It was the kind of place that felt untouched, wild in a way that made you feel like you were stepping back in time. We set up camp near the shoreline, picking a flat spot that offered a good view of the water. It was late afternoon by the time we got everything set up, and after a quick swim, we settled in for the evening. The air smelled like pine and damp earth, the sound of crickets and the distant call of a loon filling the air as the sun set behind the trees. A fire crackled in the center of our camp, and we cooked a simple dinner before turning in for the night. I was sharing a tent with my younger brother, and for the first few hours, I slept without any problems. The forest was alive with the usual night sounds, frogs croaking near the water, the occasional rustling in the underbrush. I was used to all of it, but sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up with the uncomfortable realization that I needed to relieve myself. It wasn't something I could ignore, so I quietly unzipped the tent and stepped outside, grabbing my flashlight on the way. The night was dark, with only a sliver of moonlight filtering through the trees. The fire had burned down to embers, casting a faint orange glow that did little to push back the shadows. I took a few steps away from the tent, not wanting to go too far, but also not wanting to do my business right next to camp. The ground was uneven, covered in pine needles and small rocks, and I found a spot a short distance away that seemed good enough. As I stood there, I suddenly had this strange feeling, like I was being watched. It started as a prickling sensation on the back of my neck, the kind that makes you instinctively tense up. I tried to brush it off, telling myself it was just my imagination running wild, but I couldn't shake it. The hairs on my arms stood on end, and a cold chill crept down my spine. I swallowed hard, finishing up as quickly as I could. I turned my flashlight on and slowly swept it around the trees in front of me. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the rough bark of the pines, the uneven forest floor, and the occasional low-hanging branch. Nothing seemed out of place at first. But then, as I moved the light further ahead, my breath caught in my throat. About 15 yards away, just beyond the reach of the firelight, I saw them, 6 pairs of glowing gold eyes staring back at me. For a moment, I just stood there, frozen. My mind struggled to process what I was seeing. Wolves, a whole pack of them, standing still, watching me. Their eyes reflected the light in an eerie, almost otherworldly way, but there was nothing supernatural about it. This was real. This was nature at its purest, its most dangerous. I felt my heart hammering in my chest. My hand tightened around the flashlight, and I forced myself to keep breathing, to stay as still as possible. I didn't know what to do. Running seemed like a terrible idea. Turning my back on them felt even worse. I wanted to call out to my family, but my voice wouldn't come. My entire body was locked in place, every instinct screaming at me that I was prey. Then, just as suddenly as I had spotted them, they were gone. I swept the flashlight back, but the eyes had vanished, swallowed by the darkness. There was no sound of movement, no rustling of branches or crunching of leaves. It was like they had never been there at all. I don't remember how long I stood there, but eventually my legs started working again, and I forced myself to back away slowly. My breathing was shallow, my chest tight as I turned and walked as calmly as I could toward the tent. Every step felt like an eternity, every shadow a potential threat. I kept expecting to hear something behind me, the sound of paws against the earth, but the night remained eerily silent. When I finally reached the tent, I crawled inside and zipped it up as quietly as possible. My brother was still asleep, oblivious to what had just happened. I lay there, wide awake, my body rigid with tension. Every little noise outside made me jump. A twig snapping, the wind rustling through the trees, even the distant call of an owl. Each sound sent a fresh wave of fear through me. I felt like those eyes were still out there, just beyond the reach of my vision, watching, waiting. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I just lay there, listening, heart pounding in my ears. When morning finally came, I stepped outside, squinting against the bright sunlight. The forest looked different in the daylight, less menacing, but I still couldn't shake the unease in my gut. I walked to the spot where I had seen them, half expecting to find tracks in the dirt. But there was nothing. No paw prints, no sign that anything had been there at all. I never told my family what happened that night. Maybe it was because I didn't want them to think I was overreacting, or maybe it was because part of me didn't want to admit how scared I had been. But the memory of those eyes stayed with me. Even now, years later, I can still see them when I close my eyes. That moment when I realized I wasn't alone out there, that something wild and untamed had been watching me, calculating, deciding whether I was a threat or a meal. It was a reminder that no matter how comfortable we think we are in nature, we are never truly in control. Out there, in the deep woods, we are just another part of the food chain. And sometimes, the only thing separating us from a much darker fate is the thin beam of a flashlight and a bit of luck. I had been living at my boyfriend's house for about 3 months when it happened. His room was upstairs, not in a separate part of the house, just a loft-like space at the top of the stairs with no door. The only thing separating it from the rest of the house was the staircase itself. At first, I didn't mind it. It made things feel more open, less claustrophobic, and I was getting used to the way the house felt at night. But that night, something felt different. I don't know what time it was when I woke up, but the room was dark except for a faint glow from the hallway downstairs. I had fallen asleep with my back to the stairs, facing the wall, and I remember waking up to this weird sound. It was faint at first, like air moving in circles, a sort of whooshing noise, like the way wind sounds when it blows through a small opening. I opened my eyes but didn't move, still groggy, trying to make sense of what I was hearing. The room felt different. It felt heavier, like something was pressing down on the air itself. That feeling of something being off hit me hard. I wasn't fully awake, but something deep in my gut told me that I needed to wake up. The sound wasn't stopping. It wasn't just some air current or the house settling. It was moving. It was coming up the stairs. I turned my head slightly, just enough to see the staircase from the corner of my eye, but I didn't dare move more than that. I felt frozen, not from fear yet, just from that sense of something unnatural creeping toward me. My mind started racing, trying to rationalize it. Maybe someone was awake. Maybe someone had come home late and was just walking up the stairs. But no, it wasn't footsteps. It wasn't a person moving like a person should. The closer it got, the stronger the fear hit me. My skin started to prickle. The air felt colder. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, but my body wasn't buying it. I knew something bad was coming. I felt it in my bones. The whooshing sound wasn't random. It wasn't stopping or fading. It was coming straight up, and it was getting closer. I wanted to turn around. I wanted to see what was there, but my body refused. I stayed still, frozen in place, feeling my heartbeat slam against my ribs. It was like waiting for something horrible to happen, knowing it was inevitable, knowing it was seconds away. And then I saw it. A massive shadow, bigger than any person, turned the corner at the top of the stairs. It wasn't a trick of the light. It wasn't my eyes playing games on me. It was something real, something solid, something standing right there in my space. Panic hit me like a punch to the chest. My body reacted before my mind could. I tried to scream, tried to jump up, tried to do anything, but I couldn't move. Not even a little. My limbs were dead weight. My throat locked up. I was trapped in my own body, helpless, forced to watch as this thing moved closer. It didn't rush me. It didn't lunge. It didn't make any sound. It just inched forward, slow and steady, like it had all the time in the world, like it knew I couldn't do anything about it. The whooshing sound never stopped. It swirled around me, filling the room, pressing into my ears, making my head feel like it was underwater. I tried again to move, to scream, to make any sound at all, but my body wasn't responding. My fingers wouldn't twitch. My lips wouldn't part. It was like I wasn't in control anymore. Like something else had taken over and was keeping me paralyzed on that bed, forcing me to experience this without the ability to react. I could feel it getting closer. The weight of it, the presence of it, the absolute certainty that it was right there. I was stuck, completely powerless, completely vulnerable, watching this thing creep toward me, knowing that any second it would be right over me, knowing I couldn't stop it. And then it was there, right above me. I could feel it, not like a person standing next to you, not like an object taking up space. This was different. It was pressure. It was something pushing down on me without touching me, something making my skin crawl and my breath shallow and my entire body scream at me to move, but not letting me do it. My mind was in full panic mode. Every instinct, every bit of logic, every ounce of survival kicked in at once. But none of it mattered because I was still completely frozen. I was screaming inside my head, telling myself to do something, anything, but my body wasn't listening. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, it snapped. I could move. I could breathe. I could react. I shot up, every muscle in my body firing at once. I let out a ragged, broken yell, my voice finally working again, and flailed my arms at whatever was standing there. But there was nothing. The second I moved, the second I could react, it was gone. Just like that. The weight, the sound, the presence gone. The house was silent. My boyfriend jerked awake beside me, startled by my sudden movement, and I heard the shuffle of footsteps downstairs as someone else woke up. My breathing was ragged, my body shaking, my pulse so fast I thought I might pass out. People started calling up to us, asking what happened. I could barely find my voice to answer, my throat still tight from the sheer terror of it. I forced out something about a night terror, something about it just being a bad dream. What else was I supposed to say? That I saw something? That I couldn't move? That something was in the room with me? That I felt it hovering over me, suffocating me? No, I wasn't saying that out loud. But I knew. I knew it wasn't just a bad dream. I knew it wasn't my imagination. It was real. I barely slept the rest of the week. Every night, I laid there waiting, listening, dreading that sound, terrified that it would come back. Every creak of the house, every shift in the air, every slight noise sent my pulse racing. I was afraid to fall asleep, afraid to wake up trapped again, afraid to open my eyes and see it standing there. Nothing happened again after that night. Not like that, at least. But the feeling never fully went away. Even after I convinced myself it was just sleep paralysis, even after I rationalized every part of it, even after I told myself 100 times that there was nothing there, I never shook the fear. Because in that moment, it had been real. And I knew deep down that it could happen again. I was 8 years old when it happened. It was late at night, the kind of dark that makes everything in a room feel strange, like things weren't where they should be. The only light came from the street lamp outside, and even that barely crept through the blinds, leaving the room covered in shadows. I lay in bed, eyes half open, drifting between sleep and that strange place where your mind plays tricks on you. It was cold too, the kind of chill that sank into the walls, into my blankets, into my skin. At first, I didn't notice them. My body was heavy with sleep, my mind slowed awake, but something felt wrong. That deep, uneasy feeling in my gut, the kind that makes your chest feel tight. I blinked a few times, adjusting to the dark. That's when I saw them. Faces, all around my room. They weren't clear at first, just shapes in the dark, features barely visible in the dim light. But the longer I looked, the more real they became. Eyes, noses, mouths. Some had blank expressions, others seemed to sneer or glare. They didn't move, didn't blink, didn't breathe. They just stared. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my ears. I wanted to scream, wanted to bolt out of bed and run, but I couldn't move. My body refused to obey. It was like I had been swallowed by the fear, held down by it. One face stood out more than the others. The one with the motorcycle glasses. My dad was a biker, and I had seen those glasses before, sitting on the kitchen counter or hanging from the rearview mirror of his truck. But this wasn't my dad. The face beneath the glasses was wrong, the shape of it unfamiliar. I couldn't see the eyes behind the dark lenses, but I knew they were staring at me. I could feel them, heavy and unblinking. I squeezed my eyes shut, hoping that when I opened them, the faces would be gone. But they weren't. I thought if I stayed still, if I pretended to be asleep, they wouldn't do anything. I focused on keeping my breathing slow, steady, even though my chest felt like it was about to explode. I counted in my head, trying to keep calm. 10 seconds. 20. A minute. The faces didn't move. Then, faintly, I heard something. Music. Soft, distant, coming from the living room. My parents had gone to bed hours ago. The TV was off. The house had been completely silent before this. But now there was music, just barely loud enough to hear, like an old radio playing from another room. The sound was thin, like it was coming from far away, but I knew it was inside the house. The tune was slow, unfamiliar, but there was something about it that made my skin crawl. I focused on the music, trying to figure out where it was coming from, trying to tell myself that it was normal, that maybe someone had left something on by accident. But that fear in my stomach never left. Time stretched, twisting into something that didn't make sense. A few minutes, an hour. It felt like I was trapped there forever, my body locked in place, the faces watching, the music playing, my mind racing in circles. Then I heard footsteps. Soft at first, barely more than a whisper against the floor. But they grew louder, steady, moving down the hall. My door was cracked open just enough for me to see outside, just enough to see the hallway bathed in darkness. Then a shadow moved past. My mother. Relief hit me so hard I almost gasped. My body finally responded, and before I even thought about it, I screamed. The sound burst out of me, raw and panicked. My mom stopped, turned, and flipped on the light. And just like that, the faces were gone. I looked around frantically, but there was nothing there. No shadows, no shapes, no figures staring from the corners. Just my room, looking the same as it always had. My heart was still hammering, my breath coming too fast. My mother stood in the doorway, confused, asking what was wrong. I tried to tell her about the faces, the music, the footsteps, but the words stuck in my throat. The moment I mentioned the music, her face changed. She frowned, shaking her head. Nobody's playing music. But I had heard it. I knew I had. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay awake until the sky started turning gray, my stomach twisted in knots. Every shadow, every noise made my heart jump. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been in my room, something had been watching me. For the next 2 years, I built a wall around my bed. Every stuffed animal I had stacked and lined up, creating a barrier so thick that I could barely see out. I told myself that if I couldn't see the dark corners of my room, I couldn't see what might be hiding there. And if I couldn't see them, they couldn't see me. Even now, I don't know what I saw that night. Maybe my mind was playing tricks on me. Maybe the shadows just looked like faces, and the music was some sound from outside. That's what I told myself over and over. But no matter how much I tried to believe it, part of me never did. Even now, I still sleep facing the wall. I woke up to the sound of distant sirens, muffled and broken by the thick walls of my apartment. My body felt heavy, my limbs stiff like I had been lying in the same position for too long. My mouth was dry, and my throat ached like I had been breathing in dust. The air was thick, stale, like the scent of a room that had been closed off for too long. The dream still clung to me, as vivid as if I had just lived it. I could still feel the tension in my chest, the exhaustion of running, the fear of knowing that everything outside had changed. The streets had been cracked, littered with debris. Cars were abandoned mid-road, their doors flung open, the interiors empty. The air had been thick with the smell of rot, death, decay. I had wandered through it, my heart pounding, my mind racing for some kind of solution, some kind of safety. And then there was my mother. She had returned home from a trip, brushing off everything that had happened like it was nothing. She had looked at me, frustration lining her face, and told me to do something mundane. Wash the dishes, take out the trash, something that didn't matter anymore. I had stood there, staring at her, trying to understand how she could act so normal when everything around us had crumbled. I had felt my pulse hammering in my ears, my mind unable to grasp the reality of it. She didn't see it. She didn't care. Or maybe she just refused to acknowledge it. I had tried to escape, to stall, to find a way to avoid the responsibility she was trying to hand me. I had told her I needed to rest, that I was too exhausted. And I had gone to my room, shutting the door behind me, the weight of the world pressing down on my chest. I had taken an aspirin, swallowing it down with the last of the bottled water I had scavenged. But something had gone wrong. The pill had caught in my throat, lodging itself there, making me cough, making my eyes water, my throat burn. I had struggled, gasping, trying to clear it, panic gripping my chest. The last thing I had seen in that dream was my room, exactly as it was in reality. The sunlight streaming through the blinds, casting long, golden lines across my bed. The TV was on in the living room, the muffled sound of a news broadcast bleeding through the thin walls. The time had read 11:30 a.m. on the digital clock by my bedside, and then I had woken up. For a moment, I didn't move. My mind felt scrambled, my body slow to catch up. I blinked, trying to shake off the lingering panic, the disorienting weight of the dream. But then I felt it, the same raw ache in my throat, the same tightness in my chest. I coughed, a deep, ragged sound that sent a shock of pain through me. My lungs burned. My body shook. I tried to clear my throat, but the feeling remained, thick and unmoving. I swallowed hard, my heart beginning to pound. Something wasn't right. I turned my head slightly, my gaze shifting toward the window. The sunlight was exactly the same. The same angle, the same golden hue, the same long shadows stretching across my bed. It was the same, too much the same. Slowly, I turned toward the open door of my room, my breath catching in my chest. The TV was on, the same muffled voice, the same flickering light casting erratic patterns on the wall. My pulse roared in my ears. I forced myself to sit up, my body sluggish, heavy with unease. My hands were shaking as I pushed myself off the bed, my bare feet hitting the cold floor. Every step I took toward the door felt like I was wading through something thick, something unnatural. I reached the doorway, my fingers gripping the frame. My living room stretched out in front of me, exactly as it should be. The couch, the coffee table, the half-full glass of water I had left there the night before. And the TV, playing some meaningless news segment about traffic conditions. Normal. It was all normal. But my chest felt tight. The dream had been too real. Too exact. I turned, glancing at the clock on the wall. 11:45 a.m. My stomach clenched. My head felt light, dizzy. My breath was coming too fast, too shallow. My throat still burned, my cough still raw. My body remembered the dream. The pill stuck in my throat. The way I had struggled. The way the world had matched itself exactly between my sleep and waking. My mind was racing, clawing for logic, for reason. I took slow, deliberate steps into the living room, my ears straining for something, anything, that would tell me I was awake, that I was real. And then I stopped. The door was open. I could see the edge of the hallway outside, the faint echo of someone walking down the corridor, their footsteps muted by the thick carpet. The door was open. I hadn't opened it. I stared, my breath catching in my throat. My body felt frozen, locked in place by something primal, something deep. The dream had followed me here. The details, the sensations, the moment of waking. It had all followed me, creeping into reality like a shadow slipping under a door. I swallowed again, my throat still raw. My body was real. My pain was real. But the dream. I forced myself forward, reaching out, my fingers brushing the door. The wood was solid, cool under my touch. My heart hammered. My mind screamed. I stepped into the hallway, my breath shallow, my body tense. Everything outside was the same. The hallway, the quiet hum of the building, the distant sound of someone's TV through another door. It was all normal. And yet, as I stood there, my pulse thundering, my body still trembling from the last remnants of sleep, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, that something had followed me, that the dream had not entirely ended. I shut the door, locking it with shaking hands. My breath came slow, measured. I told myself it was just a dream, a coincidence, a trick of the mind. I told myself that I was awake. But even as I stood there, in the silence of my apartment, I wasn't sure I believed it. I never thought much about the house when we first moved in. It was just another project, another place to fix up and make livable. My parents had bought it a couple of years ago, and it needed a lot of work. It had been a foreclosure, left in a state of absolute ruin. Walls full of holes, broken cabinets, filth everywhere. It was clear the previous owners hadn't just left. They'd been forced out, and not happily. It was more than just the mess, though. The first thing that stood out to me were the marks. Knife slashes, deep gouges in the doors, like someone had taken a blade to them over and over again. There were words scrawled all over the walls in marker and spray paint, hateful things. I hate you, bitch. Fuck you. Some messages were just scribbles, but others talked about death, about killing. The place carried a feeling of anger, of something unfinished. My parents had told me about the animals, horses, goats, left behind, neglected, abused. They hadn't made it. That alone made me sick to my stomach. Still, I pushed those thoughts aside. A house is just a house, right? We had a lot of work to do, and I focused on that. Gutting the place, repainting, replacing, fixing. Eventually, it started to look more like a home. Not exactly cozy, but better. Then, things started happening. Small things at first. One day, I was home alone, upstairs putting clothes away. The house was quiet, just the occasional creak from the wood settling. And then I heard it. "You need to get out of here." Just like that. Clear as day. A voice, but not loud. Not a yell, not a whisper. Just there. Like someone was standing right behind me. I froze. My first thought was that it was the TV. I shrugged it off, tried to keep moving, but a few minutes later it hit me. There was no TV on. No radio. No open windows. The house was completely silent, except for my own breathing. My stomach dropped. I stood there, staring at the hallway outside the bedroom. Nothing. The air felt too still, too thick. The kind of silence that presses in on you, making you feel like you're not alone even when you can't see anyone. I grabbed my dog's leash, walked straight out the front door, and didn't stop until I was a few blocks away. I stayed out until someone else came home. I didn't even try to explain why. A few nights later, my husband and I were in bed. Everyone else was asleep. The house was locked up tight, no windows open, no drafts. Just as I was starting to drift off, my husband spoke up. The door just opened. I sat up immediately. Our bedroom door, which had been shut, was now wide open. We stared at it. I didn't hear anything. No footsteps, no creaking. And then, before I could say a word, the door slowly swung back into place. It shut completely. I couldn't breathe for a second. He looked at me. I looked at him. I wanted to say something, anything, but there were no words for what had just happened. I didn't sleep much that night. A few days later, we took the kids out for the day. My parents were home alone. When we got back that evening, my mom was waiting for me in the kitchen. She looked pale, unsettled. "I kept hearing someone coughing upstairs," she said. "It was faint, but I thought maybe one of you had stayed home. When I went up to check, no one was there." She had gone back downstairs, shaken but trying to be logical about it. But then, as she stood in the living room, she heard it again. This time, it wasn't a cough. It was a baby crying, soft at first, then louder, coming from upstairs. She hadn't told anyone. She just sat there, stiff as a board, listening to it fade in and out until it finally stopped. She didn't know about what had happened to me, about the door, about the voice. She didn't know anything. But now, she looked at me with the same unease I had been feeling ever since that first moment alone in the house. I wanted to say it was just the house settling, or maybe we were all imagining things, but I couldn't bring myself to lie. We were all hearing it, all feeling it. I started noticing other things after that. Little shifts in the air, tiny movements in my peripheral vision, objects not where I had left them. That feeling of being watched, like someone was standing just behind me when I was home alone. I didn't want to be there anymore, but we had no other option. We were still looking for a house, still waiting. My parents weren't about to move. I tried to rationalize it all. Stress, exhaustion, tricks of the mind. But deep down I knew. Some places carry things with them. Some houses don't forget what happened inside them. And some things, some presences, don't leave just because the people do. We still live there for now. The nights are the hardest. Every creak makes my skin crawl. I don't like being in certain rooms for too long. I don't know if it will stop. I don't know if it ever really will. But I do know one thing for certain. I am not imagining it. I was 12 years old when it happened. My brother and I always played hide and seek with our neighborhood friends, Zach and Levi. We lived on a corner lot, and our yard had the perfect amount of space and hiding spots, especially after dark. The streetlights cast long shadows, and the dim glow of the occasional porch light made everything feel just a little more thrilling. We'd play until our parents called us in, running through the cool grass, ducking behind trees, whispering and giggling as we tried not to be found. It was a routine, something we did so often that it never crossed our minds that anything bad could happen. But that night was different. I was it. Standing at the big tree in the middle of the front yard, I pressed my forehead against the rough bark and started counting. 1, 2, 3. The numbers came out loud and clear, cutting through the still night air. I could hear the soft shuffle of feet as the others ran off to hide. My brother and Zach had darted toward the corner of our yard, the spot closest to the intersection of our road and the neighborhood street. Levi had taken off in the opposite direction, slipping behind a bush near the driveway. I could still hear crickets chirping, the occasional rustle of leaves in the trees above me, and the distant hum of a car in the distance. Nothing unusual, nothing strange, just another night of playing outside, the way we always did. When I finished counting, I turned around and started searching. My eyes adjusted to the dark quickly, scanning for movement, looking for a flash of a shoe or a shifting shadow. I moved toward the corner of the yard where my brother and Zach were hiding, keeping my steps light. Then, a car turned onto our street. I hesitated for just a second. The headlights cut through the dark, bright against the pavement. The car slowed as it reached the intersection. I could barely make out the shape of my brother, and Zach crouched low in the grass, pressed against the side of a bush. They weren't moving. The car sat there for what felt like too long. Then it started rolling again, creeping toward the other side of our yard, toward where Levi was hiding. Something about it made my stomach tighten. The way it moved too slow, like the driver was looking for something, or someone. My mind raced. Maybe it was just a lost driver trying to find an address. Maybe it was a neighbor. But it didn't feel right. Then, just as the car reached the far side of the yard, it picked up speed, rounded the curve in the road, and disappeared into the night. I was about to step forward, about to call out and tell the others it was fine when I saw my brother and Zach running toward me. Not just running, sprinting. Their faces were pale, their eyes wide. They didn't stop until they reached me, panting hard. Zach grabbed my arm, squeezing it tight. My brother was shaking. "We have to go inside. Now." I could hear the fear in his voice. Zach nodded quickly, looking over his shoulder, scanning the road like he expected something to jump out at us. I didn't get it. The car had been weird, sure, but it was gone now. Levi ran up to us, frowning. "What's going on?" I asked. My voice sounded normal, too normal compared to the way my brother and Zach looked. Then, my brother said something that made my stomach drop. When the car stopped, we heard a gun cock. The words hit me like a slap. My heart started pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I wanted to tell them they were wrong, that they had imagined it. But they looked so scared. Before I could respond, the night shattered. 2 gunshots. Loud, sharp, echoing through the darkness. Not close, but not far either. Down the road, maybe a block or 2 away. A deep, gut-wrenching sound that sent a jolt of fear straight through me. We didn't speak. We didn't hesitate. We ran. I don't even remember my feet hitting the ground. My legs moved on their own, my breath coming in short, fast gasps. I could hear my friends right behind me, the sound of our sneakers slamming against the pavement as we sprinted toward the house. My hand fumbled with the front door, jerking it open, and we rushed inside, slamming it shut behind us. The house felt different. Too bright, too quiet. The walls felt thin, like they couldn't keep anything bad out. My brother locked the door, his hands shaking. We stood there, trying to catch our breath, listening. But the night was silent again, like nothing had happened. We stayed inside after that. Zach and Levi sat on the couch, their faces pale. My parents asked what was wrong, and we told them everything. The car, the gunshot sound, how close it had been. They didn't brush it off, didn't tell us we were overreacting. My dad frowned, stood up, and went to check outside. The street was empty, the neighborhood quiet. Nothing seemed out of place, but I could tell he felt it too, that something wasn't right. Zach and Levi's parents came to pick them up. They left quickly, barely saying anything. The fear in their eyes matched ours. The next morning, my dad, my brother, and I walked down the road toward where we thought the shots had come from. We didn't say much. The sun was up, but I still felt that unease sitting heavy in my chest. The houses looked the same, the street as normal as ever, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. Then we saw them. 2 pistol shells lying in the grass near the curb. My dad crouched down, staring at them for a long time before picking one up. He turned it over in his hand. My brother and I just stood there, staring. We never found out what happened that night. No police reports, no news, nothing. Just those shells, just the feeling that we had been close, too close, to something we didn't want to understand. We still played outside after that. But not at night. Not anymore. Senior year of high school, I used to drive my best friend home after school. We had taken summer school to get ahead, so we only had half days. By the time I dropped her off, it was early afternoon. The streets weren't completely deserted, but there weren't as many cars as there would be later when everyone got off work. I didn't think anything of it. I was just going through my usual routine, heading home to an empty house. My parents wouldn't be home for a few more hours, so I had time to relax, maybe watch TV, scroll through my phone, or do some homework if I felt up to it. After I dropped my friend off, I pulled up to a red light. That's when I felt it, that heavy feeling, the unmistakable sense that someone was watching me. It made the hairs on my arms stand up. I turned my head and saw a man in another vehicle, wearing sunglasses, staring right at me. He didn't look away when our eyes met. I wasn't sure what to do. Not wanting to be rude, I gave him a small, polite smile and a nod before turning my attention back to the light. I figured he was just one of those people who stared a little too long. Maybe he was zoning out. Maybe he thought he recognized me from somewhere. I had no reason to think it was anything more than that. The light turned green, and I drove forward. I wasn't thinking about the guy anymore. But then, in my peripheral vision, I caught movement. I turned my head and saw him still looking at me. This time, he was trying to get my attention. He was gesturing, signaling for me to pull over. I froze. My hands tightened on the wheel. My stomach dropped, my mouth went dry, and the blood drained from my face. Every instinct screamed at me that something wasn't right. There was no reason for him to be signaling me. There was no reason for him to be trying to get me to pull over. I shook my head. I didn't even look at him directly. I just faced forward, eyes locked on the road ahead. I told myself not to panic. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. Maybe he thought something was wrong with my car. Maybe he was trying to tell me my taillight was out, or that something was hanging out of my trunk. But I knew better. Deep down, I knew. I could feel it. That tight, awful feeling in my chest told me this was bad. I kept driving, refusing to acknowledge him. But he didn't give up. He stayed right next to me, keeping pace, trying to get my attention. I could see him out of the corner of my eye, his hand moving, signaling, his body leaning slightly toward me like he was trying to make sure I saw him. My pulse pounded in my ears. I didn't react. I acted like I didn't even see him. I kept my eyes straight ahead and gripped the wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. Then, finally, he slowed down. He drifted back, and I felt a moment of relief. Maybe he had given up. Maybe he realized I wasn't going to stop, and he was just going to go on his way. I let out a slow breath. But then, I checked my rearview mirror. He was behind me. I told myself not to panic. Maybe it was just a coincidence. Maybe he was just going the same way I was. It was a possibility, right? I tried to stay calm, but that sick, twisting feeling in my gut only got worse. I turned into my neighborhood, and my heart started pounding harder. My parents weren't home. No one was home. If I pulled into my driveway, I would be completely alone. And if he was really following me, that meant he would know where I lived. He already knew I got off school early. He would know I was home alone in the afternoon. If he wanted to, he could come back anytime. I couldn't go home. I couldn't let him see where I lived. My hands were shaking as I kept driving, passing my house. My mind raced. Where could I go? What should I do? I didn't want to lead him to my house, but I also didn't want to end up somewhere isolated with no one around to help me. I turned onto another street. He followed. I turned again. He was still there. My throat felt tight. My stomach was in knots. I drove through my neighborhood, weaving through different streets, taking random turns, hoping, praying, that he would lose interest and stop following me. My heart was pounding so hard it hurt. It felt like forever. 5 minutes stretched out, feeling like an hour. I kept looking in my rearview mirror, watching, waiting, hoping he would finally disappear. And then finally he did. I turned a corner, checked the mirror, and he was gone. Just like that. I didn't stop driving right away. I kept going, just to be sure. I looped through the neighborhood one more time before finally pulling into my driveway. I sat there in my car for a long time, trying to calm down, trying to convince myself that it was over. At the time, I thought it was no big deal. I told myself that I was just being paranoid, that I had overreacted, that it was just some random guy being weird. But looking back on it now, I realize how bad it could have been. If I had pulled over when he first signaled me, if I had let him see where I lived, if I hadn't trusted my gut, who knows what would have happened? I was 17, small, alone, completely vulnerable, and he knew it. It was a late summer evening in 1998, just before dark, when I set out on the familiar drive to my girlfriend's house. The route was about 10 to 15 miles along a highway that cut through thick stretches of forest, the kind of road where your headlights were the only source of light for miles once the sun dipped below the trees. There were no gas stations, no houses, just a long stretch of blacktop flanked by endless woods. I had made this drive plenty of times before, and it was usually uneventful. I knew the turns, the slight dips in the road, where the speed limit changed. It was the kind of drive where you could relax, let your mind wander a little, maybe turn up the radio and enjoy the open road. Traffic was light that evening, barely any cars out, just the way I liked it. I passed a few vehicles early on, but by the time I got to the more isolated part of the highway, it was just me and this one truck. It wasn't a pickup truck, but one of those boxy delivery trucks, like the ones UPS drivers use. This one had a plumbing company's logo on the side, though I couldn't make out the name as I approached. The truck was moving slower than I was, so I did what anyone would do. I signaled, checked the empty left lane, and passed it. No sudden moves, no cutting him off, just a simple routine pass. But as soon as I got ahead of him, everything changed. I saw the truck surge forward in my rearview mirror, the headlights glaring brighter as it closed the distance between us. A second later, the driver pulled up alongside me, his windowless cab open on the side. I glanced over and saw him, a middle-aged guy with short hair, wearing a work shirt. His face was twisted in rage, his mouth moving as he shouted something at me. I couldn't hear him over my radio and the rush of wind, but his gestures made his intent clear. He was furious. I had no idea why. I hadn't done anything wrong. The road was empty except for the two of us. I hadn't cut him off, hadn't swerved, hadn't honked. Just passed him like you would any slow-moving vehicle. But this guy was losing his mind. He started gesturing wildly, jabbing a finger at me, shaking his fist, his arms swinging around like he was ready to throw something. Then he swerved toward me. I jerked my wheel slightly to the right to avoid him, my tires edging onto the rumble strip at the side of the road. My heart pounded as I tried to make sense of what was happening. This wasn't just road rage. This was something else. He wasn't just mad. He was aggressive, dangerous. He was trying to force me off the road. I slowed down, thinking maybe he'd just pass me and leave me alone. But he didn't. Instead, he cut in front of me and slammed on his brakes. My stomach lurched as I stomped on my own brakes, the front of my car dipping down with the sudden deceleration. My tires skidded for a second before catching the road again. I barely avoided smashing into the back of his truck. He was trying to make me stop. I wasn't going to stop. I flicked my blinker and tried to go around him, but he swerved to block me. I tried the other side, same thing. Every time I moved, he mirrored me, cutting me off with that big, bulky truck, making sure I had nowhere to go. My hands clenched the wheel. My pulse pounded in my ears. I had no cell phone. Most people didn't back then, so calling for help wasn't an option. I was alone on a dark highway with a man who seemed completely unhinged. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my head clear. He wanted me to stop. I didn't know why, but I knew that stopping wasn't an option. So I did the only thing I could. I waited for an opening and floored it. My car wasn't anything special, but it was fast enough. I waited until he veered just slightly to one side, and then I gunned it, yanking the wheel and darting past him before he could react. My tires screeched as I shot ahead, the speedometer climbing as I put as much distance between us as possible. For a few heart-stopping moments, he tried to keep up, the headlights bobbing in my rearview mirror. But his truck wasn't built for speed, and slowly, gradually, the lights fell farther and farther behind until they were swallowed by the darkness. I didn't slow down, not until I reached the edge of town, where the streetlights started again and the first signs of civilization returned. Only then did I ease off the gas, my hands still gripping the wheel, my knuckles white. My body was shaking, my breath coming fast and shallow. I pulled into my girlfriend's driveway and sat there for a minute, trying to process what had just happened. My head was spinning with questions. Who was that guy? What had set him off? Why had he been so intent on stopping me? None of it made any sense. After I calmed down a little, I did the only thing I could think of. I called the plumbing company. I wasn't sure what I expected, maybe an apology, an explanation, something. But when I told them what had happened, the response made my skin crawl. They told me they didn't have any trucks out that night. I sat there, the phone pressed to my ear, my heartbeat suddenly loud again. I repeated the description: box truck, plumbing logo, middle-aged guy driving. They insisted. No trucks were out. No one from their company had been on that highway. For a second, I considered that maybe they were lying to cover for their driver. But as I thought about it more, a worse possibility settled in. What if that wasn't their truck at all? What if someone had just stolen a truck or slapped a fake logo on an old delivery vehicle? And if that was the case, what had he wanted from me? I never found out. For weeks after that, every time I drove that stretch of highway, I felt my stomach tighten, my hands gripping the wheel just a little harder. I never saw the truck again, but the memory of those headlights in my mirror, the way he swerved at me, the way he tried to force me to stop, it never really left me. To this day, I don't know who he was or what he wanted, and I don't think I ever will. It was a regular school day, and I wasn't feeling well the night before. I told my parents I would be staying home the next day, and they didn't argue with me about it. My mom always left early in the morning for work, long before the sun came up. My dad usually woke me up before he left, but that morning, I was still groggy from sleep. I had a habit of falling back asleep easily, and that morning was no different. I barely registered the usual sounds of him getting ready before I drifted off again. Not long after, I heard a lot of noise. It was loud, thumping noises coming from somewhere in the house. Still half asleep, I assumed my dad had come back for something. Maybe he forgot his keys, maybe he was looking for some paperwork, maybe he was just being clumsy. He could be loud when he was in a hurry, and since I wasn't feeling well, I didn't bother to get up and check. I just let myself sink back into sleep. When I finally woke up again, it was around noon. The house was quiet. I felt a little better than I had earlier, but still sluggish as I stumbled out of my bedroom. I lived in a single-story house with a second floor that wasn't used much, but my bedroom was on the main level, near the back of the house. From there, it was a short walk down the hallway to the living room. I rubbed my eyes as I stepped into the room and instantly knew something was wrong. The place was a mess. Drawers were pulled open, their contents dumped onto the floor. Papers, clothes, and random household items were scattered across the carpet. The couch cushions had been lifted and tossed aside. The TV was still there, but the entertainment stand beneath it was open, DVDs and remotes tossed around. I blinked, my mind still waking up, trying to process what I was looking at. It didn't make sense at first. My parents weren't messy people. We weren't the type to leave things out like this. It looked like someone had been looking for something, digging through everything, searching. Then it hit me. This wasn't my dad. The house had been broken into. A rush of cold panic went through me. My chest felt tight, my skin prickling as if something was crawling over me. My first thought was the person still here? Was I alone? My ears rang with the sound of my own heartbeat. The house was dead silent. I strained to hear any noise, any movement. Nothing. I forced myself to breathe. Slow. Quiet. My mind raced, trying to figure out what to do next. I needed to leave. I needed to get out of the house. My legs felt stiff as I turned around and hurried back to my room. I hadn't even realized I was only wearing pajama shorts and a t-shirt. I grabbed a pair of jeans off the floor and pulled them on as quickly as I could, my hands trembling. My phone. I needed my phone. But as I looked around, I realized it wasn't where I had left it the night before. My stomach dropped. Had they taken it? I couldn't stay to find out. I slipped on my sneakers, not even bothering with socks, and grabbed my house key. I didn't want to make any noise, but at the same time, I didn't want to waste any more time in case someone was still there. I moved quickly through the hallway, glancing toward the kitchen and the front door as I passed. The door was shut. The lock was still in place. The window beside it, though, that's when I saw the broken glass. A small, jagged hole near the bottom. A brick was lying on the floor just beneath it. My stomach churned. That was how they got in. I stepped outside and locked the door behind me, even though I knew it was pointless. My neighbor's house was just across the driveway, and I hurried over, knocking hard. My hands felt clammy, my pulse still too fast. It felt like hours before my neighbor opened the door, but it had probably only been a few seconds. When she saw my face, she knew something was wrong before I even spoke. I told her what happened, at least what I knew so far. She let me inside and called the police for me. The waiting was the worst part. Sitting there, trying not to think about what could have happened if I had gotten up when I heard the noises. If I had walked into the living room and found whoever had been there. If they had seen me, if they had panicked. I kept thinking about how I had fallen back asleep, completely unaware that a stranger was going through my house. That realization made my skin crawl. When the police arrived, they walked through the house with me and took notes. The officer checked the broken window, nodding as if he had seen the same thing 100 times before. He asked if anything valuable was missing. I didn't know. I hadn't checked my parents' room or the upstairs. I knew the TV and other electronics were still there, so I had assumed the burglar wasn't looking for that kind of stuff. As we looked around, we noticed the strange details. The kitchen drawers had been pulled out, but the appliances were untouched. The bookshelf was ransacked, but none of the books were gone. The spare change jar my parents kept on the counter had been dumped out, and all the pennies had been left behind, the bigger coins taken. Then the weirdest thing, the thief had gone through my backpack, emptying everything onto the floor. My notebooks, pens, and even the crumpled tissues from the front pouch had been pulled out. And then they used my backpack to carry away the coins. Whoever had done this had taken their time. They had sat there and sorted through the change. They had methodically gone through our stuff. That meant they weren't in a rush. That meant they had been confident that no one was going to interrupt them. That meant I had been sleeping while a total stranger had all the time in the world to dig through my house. That thought stuck with me the most. The police said they would file a report, but there wasn't much they could do. No one had seen anything. There were no security cameras. They said it was probably someone looking for easy cash. The kind of person who breaks in, grabs what they can, and leaves without much risk. I should be thankful, they said, that nothing worse had happened. And I was. But that didn't stop the unease that settled in after they left. For weeks, I had trouble sleeping. Every little noise in the house made me flinch. I kept replaying that morning in my head, thinking about how close I had been to something going terribly wrong. It could have been so much worse. And the scariest part? I would have never even known they were there if I hadn't woken up at noon and seen the mess. I would have just gone about my day, completely unaware that someone had been inside, moving through the house while I slept. That thought alone made my skin crawl more than anything else. It had been a long morning at work, the kind of shift that dragged on forever. The store wasn't too busy, just a slow trickle of customers, most of them the usual types, moms with screaming kids, old folks who wanted to chat, the occasional guy in a rush who'd get frustrated when I didn't scan his items fast enough. I was 18, and working retail was nothing more than a paycheck. My feet ached from standing, and I just wanted to take a break. That's when my brother showed up. He strolled in like he owned the place, hands in his pockets, a smirk on his face like he had a secret. He always had that look. He was a couple of years older than me, and he carried himself like he'd already seen everything there was to see in the world. We weren't close in the sentimental way, but we had an understanding. He leaned against my register and asked if I wanted to grab lunch. I wasn't about to turn him down. We decided to walk instead of drive. The taco cabana wasn't far, and besides, walking meant we could smoke and talk without worrying about parking or traffic. The easiest way there was through the alley behind the strip mall, a long stretch of pavement lined with dumpsters and the occasional broken shopping cart. It was empty, like it always was. The only sound was the buzz of an old flickering streetlight and the distant hum of traffic from the main road. That's when we saw the truck. It was an old beater, some rusted-out model that had probably been around before I was born. It was parked at the far end of the alley, half in the shadow of the loading dock, just sitting there. The driver was inside, staring at us. We didn't think much of it at first, just some guy hanging out in his truck. Maybe he was on a break, maybe he was waiting for someone. It wasn't weird until we got closer, and he didn't look away. He just kept staring. I didn't like it. Something about the way he sat there, unmoving, his eyes locked on us, made my stomach feel tight. But we were dumb teenagers, and dumb teenagers don't always listen to their instincts. We walked past the truck, not talking about it, just pretending it wasn't there. And then, because we were idiots, we picked up some empty beer bottles from the ground and smashed them against the pavement. No real reason, just being destructive, the way teenagers sometimes are. The sound shattered through the alley, echoing off the walls. We kept walking, about to step out onto the main road, when we heard the engine roar to life behind us. Tires screeched. I turned my head just in time to see the truck lurch forward, coming straight for us. My brother yanked me to the side, and the truck skidded to a stop, blocking the exit. The driver's side door flew open. He was out before I even had time to process what was happening. A man older, maybe in his 50s or 60s, with a rough face and a wiry frame. He had a gun in one hand and a phone in the other. His face was twisted with anger, his mouth moving too fast for me to understand at first. Then the words started to sink in. "I finally caught you fucking with this place," he shouted. "I knew I'd get you." I didn't know what the hell he was talking about. We had never seen this guy before in our lives. My brother and I froze, glancing at each other. The man kept yelling into his phone, saying he had found us, and that he was taking us to the police station. His voice was frantic, his grip on the gun tight. Then he looked right at us. "The dispatcher says you need to get in the truck." I didn't believe him. Something was wrong. No way would a 911 dispatcher tell two kids to get into a stranger's truck. I could feel my heart pounding. My brother was tense beside me, his hands clenched into fists. "We're not getting in," I said. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. The man's face twisted into something even angrier. He lunged forward, grabbing my brother's arm, trying to pull him toward the truck. My brother yanked himself free, stepping back. "We'll wait for the cops," he said. "But we're not going anywhere with you." The man hesitated. I could see the calculation in his eyes, the way he was trying to decide what to do next. Then, without warning, he let out a frustrated noise, muttered "fuck this," and jumped back into his truck. The tires screeched as he tore out of the alley, disappearing into the night. We stood there, not moving, not speaking, just breathing hard. The alley was silent again. It felt like we were standing in some kind of void, like the world had paused for a moment. I looked at my brother, and he looked at me. There was nothing to say. Eventually, we made it to Taco Cabana. We ordered our food, sat down, and ate in silence. The whole time, I kept expecting the guy to show up again, to come bursting in through the doors, to pull up outside in his truck. But he never did. We didn't tell anyone. We didn't call the cops. I don't know why. Maybe we were in shock. Maybe we thought no one would believe us. Maybe we just wanted to forget. But I never really forgot. Even now, years later, I still think about it. I think about what would have happened if my brother hadn't yanked himself free, if that man had managed to drag one of us into his truck. I think about the fact that he was waiting there, staring at us, long before we ever noticed him. I think about how certain he was when he said he had caught us, like he had been looking for us, like he had been waiting for that exact moment. And I wonder if we were just in the wrong place at the wrong time, or if that man had a plan for us all along. When I was young, we lived in an old cottage built in the late 1800s. It was the kind of house that creaked and groaned in the night, settling into itself like an old man shifting in his chair. My parents decided to renovate it in 1995, moving the staircase to a different part of the house. The original staircase had been steep, narrow, and enclosed by a little wooden door at its base. It had 13 steps. The new one they built was wider, open, and had 12 steps instead. The old staircase was dismantled, but sometimes at night, we still heard footsteps moving up and down where it used to be. 13 distinct steps, then the sound of a door clicking shut. It wasn't every night, but often enough that it became a presence in our lives. My parents wrote it off as the house adjusting, or maybe our imaginations playing tricks on us. I didn't buy it though. I knew what I heard. It was different from the usual shifting of the old wooden beams, or the wind rattling against the glass. This had a rhythm to it, a slow, deliberate weight pressing down on each step, one after another. Then that door that wasn't there anymore. I hated it. I hated how my stomach twisted in knots every time I heard those steps, how I held my breath, straining my ears for any other sound. Sometimes I would press my face into my pillow, trying to block it out. Other times, I would stare at my ceiling, counting along with the steps, always knowing the last one would end with that impossible door shutting. Then there was the night with my sister. We had bunk beds, me on the bottom, her on the top. I woke up feeling strange, like something wasn't quite right. The room was dim, just the glow from the street lamp outside filtering through the curtains. I glanced up, expecting to see the edge of my sister's blanket hanging down, but it wasn't there. She was gone. I sat up slowly, my pulse thudding in my ears. The bed above me was empty. The blanket was tossed to the side, but she wasn't there. I climbed down, feeling the chill of the wooden floor under my bare feet. I checked the hallway. It was dark and quiet. I don't know why, but I didn't call for her. Something about the silence in the house made me feel like I shouldn't. Instead, I walked to my parents' room. The door was slightly open, and I pushed it wider, stepping inside. That's when my mother and sister screamed. It was instant and terrified, their voices rising in panic. My mother's face was twisted in fear, eyes wide, mouth open as she shouted for me to stop moving. My sister was clutching the blanket up to her chest, mirroring my mother's expression. I froze, my whole body locking up. I didn't know what was happening, but their fear was enough to root me to the spot. My mother's voice wavered as she told me to back away slowly. I did. My heart pounded. My breath came in short gasps. She wouldn't tell me what she saw, not that night. But later, she swore to me that I had almost walked straight into something. A figure, greenish and faint, standing right in front of me. She said it was there, and then it was gone. I never saw anything, only their fear. But that was enough. It should have ended there, but the cottage never let go of its grip on me. Years later, after my grandmother passed away, I had a strange coincidence that made me think about all of it again. She had set up a bank account for me when I was little, and I didn't even know it existed until long after she was gone. I went to the bank to sort out the paperwork, signing forms, dealing with numbers that didn't feel real. Outside, a busker was playing a song on his guitar. The notes drifted through the air, a tune I hadn't heard in years. The Girl from Ipanema, my grand's favorite. Our song. We used to listen to it together all the time. It was our thing. And now, here it was, playing at the exact moment I was handling something she had left behind for me. It wasn't a ghost. It wasn't some fairy tale sign from beyond the grave. It was just a coincidence. But it sat in my chest like a weight, something I couldn't shake. The same way I could never fully explain the footsteps on the old staircase. The same way I could never forget the way my mother and sister had looked at me that night, their faces pale and filled with a fear I had never seen before. I don't believe in ghosts, but sometimes I wonder. Back in high school, there was this old abandoned house deep in the country that everyone knew about. It had been sitting out there for years, hidden in the woods, far from the main roads. You had to know where you were going to even find it. First, you had to get off the highway, drive a few miles down a winding back road, then turn onto a dirt road that stretched for what felt like forever. The trees on either side grew so thick that even with your headlights on, the night seemed to swallow the light. Finally, when the road ended, you had to walk about half a mile through the woods to reach the house. One night, me and my buddy thought it'd be a good idea to take a couple of girls out there to impress them. The idea was simple. We'd show how fearless we were, walk through the house, maybe tell them a few stories, and then head back. It was supposed to be fun, just something to get their hearts racing, so they'd cling to us. We figured we'd get a few laughs out of it and head home with a story to tell. So we loaded up in my buddy's car and made the drive out there. The dirt road was rough, full of potholes and deep ruts that made the car shake every time we hit one. The air smelled like damp earth, the kind of smell you get after it rains, even though it hadn't that day. By the time we reached the end of the road, the trees were so thick around us that you couldn't see the sky. It was just blackness, except for the moonlight filtering through the branches. We got out and started the walk to the house. The forest was dead quiet, no crickets, no wind, just the sound of our footsteps crunching on fallen leaves and twigs. That was the first thing that felt off. Usually, in the middle of the woods, you hear something, bugs, birds, maybe even an animal moving in the brush. But that night, there was nothing. When we finally got to the house, it was exactly how we expected it. The wood was rotting, the windows were busted out, and vines had started to crawl up the walls. The front door hung crooked on its hinges, and when we pushed it open, the sound it made was like nails on a chalkboard. Inside, the air was thick and musty. The floor was covered in dirt and old leaves that had blown in over the years. Pieces of furniture were still there, but they were broken and rotting, barely recognizable. As we walked through, the boards creaked under our weight, and every sound we made seemed to echo. There was graffiti on the walls, random names, some curse words, and symbols we didn't recognize. The deeper we went inside, the heavier the air felt, like something was pressing down on us. After looking through the house, we decided to check out the shed out back. It was small, barely standing, with a rusted metal roof and wooden walls that were warped and splintered. The door was swollen from rain and wouldn't budge at first, so we put our weight into it, trying to force it open. That's when we heard it. A scream. It was high-pitched and sharp, cutting through the silence like a knife. It came from inside the house. We froze. There were only 5 of us, and we were all standing right there by the shed. My first thought was that some of our other friends had followed us out there and were messing with us. That seemed like the only logical explanation. So we ran back inside, thinking we'd catch them in the act. But when we got in, there was no one. We checked every room, every corner, even the closets. The house was empty, just like it had been when we first walked through it. The air was still thick, and now it felt even worse, like the walls were closing in. My stomach was twisting, but I kept telling myself that someone had to be messing with us. Maybe they had hidden somewhere or ran off before we got inside. Then we heard it again. This time, the screaming was all around us. Not just from one direction, but from everywhere. It wasn't just one voice either. It was layered, overlapping, coming from the walls, the ceiling, outside, everywhere at once. It was a woman's voice, no doubt about it, but it wasn't saying words. It was just screaming over and over, raw and desperate. That was enough for us. We bolted. We ran out the front door, barely stopping to make sure we weren't tripping over each other. The second we stepped outside, the screams got even louder. It felt like they were chasing us, pushing us to move faster. I don't remember making the half-mile run back to the car, only that my lungs were burning by the time we got there. We yanked the doors open and jumped in, slamming them shut and locking them out of instinct, even though we didn't know what we were locking out. My buddy started the car, and we peeled out of there, tires spitting gravel and dust. No one spoke. No one even looked at each other. It wasn't until we were miles away, back on the main road, that anyone said a word. We told my buddy's older brother about it later that night. We expected him to laugh, to call us idiots for getting scared. But he didn't. He just looked at us, real serious, and said, "You know they found bodies there, right?" We didn't believe him at first. Thought he was messing with us, trying to freak us out even more. But he swore it was true. He said back in the early 70s, some hunters found a bunch of bodies buried in the woods near that house. He didn't know all the details, just that it had been bad. Real bad. After that night, none of us ever went back out there. We talked about it a few times, tried to come up with a reasonable explanation for what happened. But none of our friends ever admitted to messing with us. And even if they had, there was no way to explain how those screams came from all around us, how they sounded so desperate, so real. I still don't know what caused it. Maybe it was animals. Maybe it was the wind doing something weird with the trees. Maybe it was just in our heads, all of us feeding off each other's fear. But even now, thinking back on it, I can still hear it. That screaming, like someone was trapped out there, calling for help, but there was no one left to save them. And there never would be. I left class at exactly 4:15 p.m. My professor, a strict Korean man, always dismissed us at the same time. Never a minute early, never a minute late. He ran the class like clockwork, and that day was no different. I gathered my things, left the classroom, and started walking toward the parking lot. It took me the usual 10 minutes to reach my car. The afternoon air was cool, and the sun was beginning to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows over the pavement. I unlocked my car, slid into the driver's seat, and checked my phone before starting the engine. The time read 4:22 p.m. I didn't feel rushed. My shift at work started at 5:30 p.m., and I knew from experience that the drive took me about an hour, sometimes a little less if traffic was light. My best time had been 47 minutes, but that was with almost no cars on the road and hitting every green light. I wasn't expecting to match that today. I settled in, started the engine, and began my drive. The drive felt normal. I went through my usual route, taking the same turns, the same highways, passing the same buildings and trees. Traffic was the usual mix, cars moving steadily, the occasional slowdown near intersections, nothing out of the ordinary. I wasn't in a rush, so I drove at my usual pace, letting my mind wander as I listened to music. I remember watching the trees blur past, the sunlight flickering through the leaves, the occasional truck rumbling by. It felt like an ordinary, uneventful drive. I pulled into the parking lot at work and glanced at the dashboard clock. 4:52 p.m. That didn't register at first. I turned off the engine, grabbed my phone, and checked the time again. 4:50 p.m. My brain tried to make sense of it. I had left campus at 4:15 p.m. It should have taken me an hour, but here I was, sitting in my car, a full half hour early. I sat there, staring at the numbers on my phone screen, trying to process what I was seeing. Maybe I had misread something. Maybe class had ended early. That seemed logical. I pulled up my messages and scrolled back to the last text I had sent before leaving. 4:22 p.m. That didn't make sense. I had left at the usual time. There was no way I could have made an hour-long drive in just 25 minutes. Even if I had gone 90 miles per hour the entire way, which I hadn't, it still wouldn't add up. I got out of the car and walked into work, still feeling off. My boss glanced at me as I walked in. "You're early," he said. That made it real. I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't misremembering. Something had happened. I went back outside, still trying to make sense of it. Maybe my car's clock was off. I checked. It read 4:52 p.m., different by only 2 minutes from my phone, but that wasn't enough to explain anything. I tried retracing the drive in my head, remembering every turn, every traffic light, every moment behind the wheel. It had felt normal. It had felt like an hour. Nothing had seemed rushed or out of sync. My fuel gauge showed normal consumption. I hadn't burned through gas like I would have if I had been speeding. Nothing indicated that I had done anything differently than any other day. I asked a couple of classmates the next day if we had been let out early. They all said no. The professor had ended class at exactly 4:15 p.m., just like always. I checked my phone's call and text logs again. The timestamps all lined up. Everything about the day fit perfectly, except for the fact that I had covered an hour's worth of driving in 25 minutes. There was no logical explanation. I wasn't missing time. I hadn't blacked out. I had experienced every second of the drive as if it were normal, as if time had passed the way it always did. The only difference was the clock saying otherwise. In the end, I let it go. I made an extra $3 on my paycheck from clocking in early, and that was the only tangible evidence that anything strange had happened. But even now, I still think about it. I still try to make sense of it. I still wonder how it was possible, and I still have no answers. The sun was blinding on the white sand, bouncing off the surface of the waves that stretched endlessly to the horizon. The smell of salt and sunscreen filled the air, mixing with the faint scent of grilled seafood from one of the beachfront restaurants. I could hear the muffled chatter of tourists, the occasional laughter of children splashing in the shallows, and the rhythmic crash of the surf. It was our second full day in the Bahamas, and everything felt like a dream. Warmth, freedom, and the slow, lazy ease of island life. No stress, no worries, just the sun on our skin and the ocean calling us in. We had wandered down the beach past the resort, our feet sinking into the soft sand, past groups of locals selling everything from seashell necklaces to boat rides. Some were pushing sunglasses and handmade bracelets, others whispering about weed, mushrooms, whatever you wanted. The usual tourist hustle. A guy caught our attention, young, good-looking, with an easy smile and sunglasses perched on top of his head. He stood beside a sleek red jet ski, waving us over. "Free ride, no charge," he said, his grin wide, teeth gleaming. "You ladies look like you could use some fun." Who could say no to that? The prices for jet ski rides were insane, so getting a free one felt like hitting the jackpot. He helped us onto the back of the jet ski, the heat of the sun instantly replaced by the cool spray of ocean mist as we took off, skimming across the water at exhilarating speed. The shore shrank behind us as we flew over the waves, the wind tangling our hair. It felt incredible, the kind of rush you only get from the perfect mix of sun, sea, and a little bit of recklessness. At some point, he glanced over his shoulder, voice raised over the roar of the engine. "You like to smoke der herb?" We laughed, exchanged a glance. Of course we did. He told us he and his friends were having a party just an island over. Good weed, good beer, good company. We looked in the direction he pointed, a small, empty-looking island about half a mile away. The idea sounded amazing. Getting invited to an exclusive local party, that was exactly the kind of adventure we had hoped for. We didn't hesitate, didn't even think about it. The ride to the island started fun, but after a minute, the feeling shifted. The shore behind us became smaller and smaller, the sounds of the tourists fading until there was nothing but the wind and water. No more hotels, no more families or couples lounging under umbrellas. Just the open ocean stretching out on all sides, the island ahead looking more isolated with each passing second. I felt a tightness in my stomach, an unease creeping in. The jet ski felt slower now, like it was moving at a crawl. The distance between us and safety felt enormous. When we pulled up to the shore, I knew instantly that something was wrong. There was no party, no music, no drinks, no other young people. Just a group of men sitting around a fire pit, speaking in a language we didn't understand. They weren't laughing, weren't celebrating. They were just watching us, eyes dark and unreadable, scanning us from head to toe. Not friendly, not welcoming, just watching. We climbed off the jet ski slowly. The sand felt too hot under my feet, my skin prickling from more than just the sun. The men didn't stop talking, but their voices dropped, their words hushed, their tones unreadable. I couldn't tell what they were saying, but I could feel it. The way they looked at us, the way they murmured among themselves. Something wasn't right. I glanced at my friend. She felt it too. I could see it in her face, the slight tightening of her jaw, the way her shoulders squared just a little, the same fear that was rising in my own chest. The guy who had brought us here stepped off the jet ski, shaking the water from his shorts. He wasn't smiling anymore. The charm was gone. My heart started pounding. I could feel it in my throat, in my ears. We needed to leave. Right now. But how? We were alone. No one knew where we were. No one was coming to help. I could feel the weight of their stares, the air between us thick with unspoken danger. I reached for my phone, keeping my movements slow, careful. My hands were shaking as I pressed it to my ear. I didn't have service. It didn't matter. I lifted my voice just enough, made it waver. Mom, I know. We're coming back now. Just calm down, okay? I let my voice tremble. No, don't call the police. We're fine, I swear. We're on our way right now. Please just stop freaking out. The moment I said police, the air changed. The men at the fire exchanged glances. The guy who had brought us here stiffened. There was a pause, a long, agonizing pause, and then a few hurried words between them. I could feel my friend holding her breath next to me. Finally, our guide gave a tight, forced smile. Okay, he muttered. I take you back. We didn't hesitate. We climbed onto the jet ski, gripping tight as he turned it back toward the main beach. He didn't speak, didn't look at us. The ride back felt different, too fast, reckless, like he wanted to get rid of us as quickly as possible. As soon as we hit the shore, we jumped off, stumbling through the sand, pushing past tourists without looking back. I don't even remember if we said thank you. By the time we turned around, the guy was already gone, speeding off across the water, disappearing toward the horizon. We never saw him again. For the rest of the trip, we checked the beach every day. He wasn't there. It was like he had never existed. We didn't tell anyone what happened. Not really. We joked about it, laughed about how stupid we had been, but deep down we knew. We knew what almost happened. And we knew how close we had come to disappearing on that empty island, our names never making it past the local news. We were lucky. Just stupid, lucky girls who made it back. But that feeling never really went away. Even now, years later, I can still feel it. The heat of that sand, the weight of their stares, the slow, terrible realization sinking in. The moment we knew we were in the wrong place, with the wrong people, and that if we didn't think fast, we wouldn't be coming back at all.